Do you hear me okay? Fine, thank you very much.
Fine, thanks.
On behalf of my deputy convener and myself and officers, like to welcome you to this planning committee Thursday the 19th of January. And in accordance with section 43 of the Local Government Scotland Act 2003, it has been directed that this meeting will be conducted in such a manner as to allow remote attendance by elected members. The meeting will also be live streamed. First of all, have we any apologies?
We have none submitted, convener. Thank you.
Any apologies for the floor? None? Okay, thank you. Once again, could I say that I've got to give a warm welcome to a new member of the committee, Councillor Flynn, who started off with the PDH. Just to give you a warm welcome to this first of your planning committee, and I'm quite sure you're going to enjoy the experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That takes us to declaration of interest, and just for clarity, I'll read this out. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Have we any declarations of interest at this time? None submitted. Fine, thank you very much. That takes us to item 3 on your agenda, which is pages 3 to 8. It's the minute of meeting of the Planning Committee held on the 16th of November 2022. Is there any questions arising from that minute? Can we agree the minute?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, thank you very much. Also aware of a supplementary agenda was issued electronically with the minute of meeting of the PDH the 20th of January 2022. This is for noting, and the 1st of September 2022 for approval. Can we agree? Any questions arising? Can we agree the minute? Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Agreed.
That takes us to item 4 on your agenda this morning. Erection of visitor centre to include information, exhibition space, arts and craft workshop, restrooms, cafe and retail area, and 82 bungalows at Airth Mains Farm, Cemetery Road, Airth, for George Russell Construction Limited. This is a continuation. It's pages 9 to 115 on your agenda. Now, before we bring in Brent Vivian for the report, a deputation request has been made by David Jones, agent for the applicant, to be received. Now, members, first of all, I've got to decide whether we're going to agree to hear Mr. Jones. I'm quite happy to move we hear him.
Agreed.
We agreed to that?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That takes us then to Brent Vivian, our planning officer, to read the report. Thank you, Mr. Vivian.
Thank you, convener. Members will recall that this application was considered by the committee on the 16th of November last year, when it was agreed to continue consideration of the item to a future meeting in order to allow the applicant time to clarify matters relating to equalities and financing. To remind members, the application is for a major development and seeks planning permission in principle for the erection of a visitor centre and 82 bungalows. The bungalows are intended as enabling development to cross-fund provision of the visitor centre. To remind members of the indicative master plan in support of the application, could I ask Jack, please, if you could bring up the master plan for viewing. Okay, so you won't see the entire site in one go, but the site is outlined in red. It lies to the north and west of Airth Village, to the west of the A905. The proposed visitor centre is to the north of the B9124, between the B9124 and the Pineapple. The housing consists of 4 clusters on a long and narrow site between the B9124 and Airth Mains Farm buildings and Douglas Avenue to the south. Both the proposed visitor centre and the housing would be served from a new roundabout on the A905 and a realignment of the B9124 through the design landscape between the Pineapple and the East Lodge. Yeah, that's right. It's at the north end. That's correct. Thank you, Jack. Members will also recall that the application was a subject of a predetermination hearing held remotely on the 20th of January 2022. This was because a predetermination hearing is required for an application for a major development that is significantly contrary to the development plan. The application is considered significantly contrary to the local development plan, owing to the scale of the proposed housing out with the Earth Village limits within the countryside, and the impact of the proposed development on the historic environment, Dunmore Park and the Pineapple design landscapes. The second predetermination hearing was held remotely on 1st September 2022 for the reasons explained in the previous report to committee. Committee site visits to view the physical characteristics of the site and surrounds took place on the 31st of January 2022 and the 31st of October 2022. The report prepared for the 16th of November committee was not presented, so it is my intention to present from both the update report and the main report, convener, if that's okay.
Aye.
Since the committee meeting on the 16th of November 2022, the applicant has made further submissions in respect of equalities and financing. The applicant has advised that they have no wish to be discriminatory with respect to any protected characteristic group as identified within the Equality Act 2010. Having assessed the financial implications of removing the age occupancy restriction to over 55s, the applicant is satisfied that the current development proposals are viable and will no longer propose this restriction on the bungalows. This means the sections of the previous report relating to human rights and equality and the monitoring and enforceability of the proposed age occupancy restriction no longer need to be considered. The applicant contends that the absence of any age restriction would also meet a number of related concerns and express views by the Council's Housing Service and Falkirk Health and Social Care Partnership. At the hearings, a range of matters were requested by committee to be addressed in the final report, and these matters are covered in the previous report to committee dated 16th of November. The previous report also set out the detailed planning assessment against the local development plan and also covered the considerations material to the planning application, which includes Scottish planning policy, the planning history for the site, the consultation responses, the public representations and the principles of enabling development. The further material consideration, National Planning Framework 4, is referred to in the update report. The planning history for the site includes planning application reference P190578 PPP for construction of a visitor centre and 22 bungalows, which was approved by the committee contrary to officer recommendation as a minded to grant decision on the 17th of June 2020. The reasons for the approval are outlined in paragraph 3.3 of the previous report. The main differences between the current application and the 2019 application include the number of units across fund provision of the visitor centre has increased from 22 to 82. The indicative size of the proposed visitor centre has reduced from circa 10,600 square feet to 6,000 square feet. The applicant has confirmed that the viability of the visitor centre relies on the cafe element as the principal use of the building. And the recent proposal, as I've just referred to, for the bungalows to not be restricted to over 55-year-olds. Planning history also refers to the reporter's decision on allocation of the site for a visitor centre and enabling bungalow development through the local development plan 2 process. The previous report records that 156 representations had been received, consisting of 83 representations in support, 68 objections and 5 neutral representations, and that Earth Community Council had decided to take a neutral stance. The updated report records the concerns raised in 2 further representations received since the 16th of November 2022, committee meeting. In terms of National Planning Framework 4, the following update can be given. The Scottish Government Chief Planner issued a letter on the 16th of January confirming that on 11th of January, the Scottish Parliament voted to approve National Planning Framework 4. It is important to note that National Planning Framework 4 has not yet been formally adopted. Scottish ministers will adopt and publish National Planning Framework 4 on the 13th of February, at which point it will become part of the development plan and Scottish planning policy will be superseded. Until the 13th of February, National Development Planning Framework 4 remains a material consideration, and it is for members to decide what weight should be given to it in the assessment of this application. Our assessment is that the framework, as approved by the Scottish Parliament, does not alter the recommendation before members today. In terms of the overall planning assessment, obviously there's a lot of information in the main report. There's a lot of complexities to the application, and I would attempt to summarise the main issues as follows. First, the site lies out with the Earth village limits within the countryside. In terms of the countryside policies, there is no basis for supporting the application, and it has been assessed as significantly contrary to the development plan. Second, the proposed visitor centre and associated infrastructure, including the car park and realignment of the B9124, represent a significant intervention within the garden and design landscape at Dunmore Park and the Pineapple. The proposal has been assessed as significantly adversely affecting the character setting, integrity and tranquility of this design landscape. Further information on these impacts can be provided if requested. Third, there were no objections from consultees to the previous planning application in respect of impacts on the design landscape. No consultation response was received from National Trust for Scotland. In contrast, an objection has been received from the Trust to the current application as detailed in the previous report. They advise that the proposed visitor centre has no relationship to the Trust's conservation and management of the Pineapple. They have no interest in or connection to the proposed visitor centre. This objection is considered to be a significant material consideration in determining the current application. Fourth, the applicant's proposed strategy to mitigate impacts on the design landscape is to introduce screen planting. The introduction of screen planting into an area of the design landscape characterised by open parkland and open farmland is not supported. Fifth, the private access core path along the top of the escarpment from the form the logical and defensible village limits for Earth. The proposed housing extends beyond this logical boundary onto open farmland to the detriment of the setting of the village. The proposed visitor centre would elongate the village, and the realigned B9124 could then be seen in effect as forming the new village boundary and put additional pressure on development between the existing village boundary and the realigned B9124, including within the design landscape. Sixth, the applicant's landscape and visual impact assessment identified the potential for high and medium visual impacts, including from areas to the west of the site. The mitigation strategy focuses on new woodland, edge planting, and limiting the housing to low-density single-storey bungalows. However, new planting would take some considerable time to mature to provide effective screening, and the development is largely unable to take advantage of existing features to nestle the development into the countryside setting. The scale of the linear form of the proposed housing exacerbates this impact. Seventh, the proposal for a long single cul-de-sac access and the lack of variety in house type and housing density is at odds with placemaking principles and designing streets. This is particularly so given the increase in number of units from 22 to 82. Eighth, the edge of village location does not promote accessibility and ease the movement for pedestrians. The existing footway along the A905 beyond the village towards the proposed visitor centre is substandard in width, and there is no guarantee that a bus service would actually serve the proposed houses, even if the cul-de-sac was designed to accommodate buses. Ninth, the principal use intended for the visitor centre is a cafe run by the applicant as a family business. No information has been provided to demonstrate that the proposed visitor information display area within the visitor centre would actually be delivered. National Trust for Scotland consider that the proposal is perhaps best understood as a cafe and retail use and assessed on that basis. 10th, the applicant's updated viability appraisal indicates the developer profit actually increases from 10.12% to 18.08% by removing the age occupancy restriction, while also factoring in education and place-based contributions. This is because, according to the appraisal, removal of the restriction would broaden demand, shorten completion times, and increase unit prices. However, neither the original or the revised appraisal factor in the affordable housing requirement, so the impact of this on profit and the actual profit level have not been quantified at this stage. The scale of enabling development should be the minimum necessary to secure the beneficial development, while allowing an appropriate level of developer profit. What constitutes a fair and reasonable level of developer profit will depend on the particular circumstances. It is relevant for the committee to consider that the applicant was seemingly prepared to proceed on the basis of a much lesser profit than the 18.08% now indicated, and consider the case now for 82 enabling bungalows in that context. Balanced against these issues, the proposed development also offers potential benefits, and these include the potential economic benefits from both the construction stage and once the proposed visitor centre is operational. The submitted business plan anticipates the creation of 35 construction jobs and up to 20 full and part-time jobs when the visitor centre is fully operational, although the Trust consider that the projections for visitors to the proposed visitor centre appear very ambitious. The potential to make a significant contribution towards addressing the Council's current shortfall in the effective housing land supply of 122 units. The provision of new facilities of value to the local community and visitors to the area, including visitors to the Pineapple. An increase in parking facilities in the area for users of the Pineapple and those wishing to access the local network of active travel routes. The possibility of a bike hub being established at the visitor centre for the hire of electric bikes. The provision of new habitat for wildlife and enhancements to biodiversity arising from the planting strategy. And lastly, the provision of a new roundabout on the A905, which can be seen as beneficial to the extent that it would calm traffic and slow traffic speed at the village edge. The overall conclusion, Convener, is that the benefits of the proposed development would not outweigh the costs and the proposal would not contribute to sustainable development. No new matters are raised in the update report that would alter the previous recommendation to refuse the application. The previous recommendation is therefore reiterated, except for removal of condition 11, as the applicant is no longer proposing the age occupancy restriction on the bungalows. It is highlighted that the application is significantly contrary to the local development plan, and 9 of the 10 recommended reasons for refusal relate to policies of the local development plan. Thank you, Convener.
No, thank you very much. That was a very fulsome report you gave us there, Mr. Vivian. It's now an opportunity for Mr. David Jones, the agent, to speak on behalf of the application. You'll have 10 minutes, Mr. Jones, then there'll be an opportunity for members, should they wish, to ask you any relevant questions regarding your summary. Okay, so you have 10 minutes from now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener. A visitor centre close to the Pineapple Heritage Resource will extend and enhance visitor interest in the area. It will provide jobs, bring additional revenue to the village and expand tourism both locally and across the Falkirk area. At present, casual visitors to the Pineapple have restricted access and no facilities. The Visitor Centre CAF will also provide a destination for many local cyclists, walkers and residents. No organisation or private developer is proposing to improve the visitor centre visitor experience for the Pineapple, which clearly falls way short of that offered at other places of visitor interest in the area. Improved signage, road and parking facilities, along with public transport stop, washroom facilities, cafe, exhibition, interpretive space and art shop. These facilities require funding, and whilst the applicant has demonstrated that the visitor centre will be sustainable long term from the proposed family cafe business operation, the capital funding required to meet infrastructure and building costs, roundabout access and planning obligations require enabling development of 82 units, 20 of which are required to meet the Council's affordable housing policy. The supporting bungalow development will be progressed in stages linked to the construction and completion of the visitor centre and associated infrastructure. We know from the officer's report that there is a 122 unit shortfall in the current supply of housing, and need exists for accommodation locally if the council are to meet its obligations in respect of its effective housing land supply requirements. This housing development will clearly contribute to meeting that shortfall. Business case for the cafe enterprise has been reviewed by the council's gateway service and considered fair and reasonable. The scale of enabling development is directly related to development costs and has independently been assessed by the district valuer, who concluded that a greater housing component would be required if site acquisition and standard industry operating profit were to be applied. The applicants are already landowners and will be the owner-operators of the cafe for the visitor centre. For the past 10 years, they've operated a successful cafe coffee shop at Sutra Farm in Midlothian, and see this, the cafe at Canada Wood, Falkirk, the Smitty, Blair Drummond and Craigie's, South Queensferry are great examples of what can be achieved. All these developments appeal to a wide selection of visitors, including growing interest in walking and cycling. Visitor Centre and Cafe would link into the area's extensive foot and cycle path network, much like that at Canada Wood. Forth Bikes already manage a network of electric bike hubs, hiring to visitors and residents across Forth Valley. There is currently a gap between Falkirk and Stirling, and they see the Earth Visitor Centre as a welcome addition to this network. Linking the Earth Visitor Centre to the Helix Around Town cycle route, Kelpies, Falkirk Wheel and Calendar Park is only to be welcomed, and the applicants are committed to working with Forth Bikes to establish a hub facility at the Earth Visitor Centre. So too with walking. The council website already lists several walks around the Earth area, including 2 circular walks from the Pineapple. The visitor centre would provide a convenient starting point with safe parking, cafe and washroom facilities similar to that at Canada Wood, albeit in an area of less challenging terrain and more convenient to residents north side of Falkirk. As to concerns regarding National Trust Scotland's position, environmental and visitor impact on the Pineapple, the recently prepared Visitor and Natural Asset Plan in consultation with the Trust provides a working arrangement in relation to visitor management issues such as signage, interpretive information, provision of dedicated footway and future site maintenance matters. This cooperative exercise should allay any concerns regarding shared operational matters, given the very pragmatic views expressed by Mr. Maxwell, General Manager, Edinburgh and East Region of National Trust Scotland, at the September predetermination hearing. He considered that the visitor centre would have little adverse impact on the Trust property, and an increase in visitor numbers would help deter present high levels of antisocial behaviour and visitor income generation. Mr. Maxwell further confirmed that the visitor centre would not conflict with any long-term plans of the Trust have for the Pineapple and its grounds. Regarding the age occupancy restriction and possible discrimination under the Equalities Act, in light of the officer's report, the applicant has reassessed the enabling bungalow component without occupation ownership age restrictions and is satisfied that 82 unrestricted units will provide the capital support necessary to deliver the project in its entirety, including all passive, active open space, education and affordable housing policy contributions. The absence of restrictions will remove any suggestion of discrimination and require no long-term occupation / ownership monitoring of the development. As such, these restrictions are no longer part of the proposals. Finally, if committee are again minded to support this application in principle, the developer will bring forward detailed proposals at the earliest opportunity. A phase 1 building programme will be centred around the construction and completion of the visitor centre to an agreed bungalow completion / sales timetable. Falkirk has already benefited from a range of successful investment initiatives linked to its heritage and industrial past. The applicant firmly believes that a visitor centre here at Airth will add to the growing level of visitor interest in the Falkirk area, provide a further local economic boost in relation to jobs, expand existing leisure networks and extend the range of housing opportunities locally. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much. An opportunity now for members of the committee to ask any questions of your good self. Any questions to Mr. Jones? Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Convener. I didn't really intend to, that I, obviously I'd quite like to come in when we get to the main debate. But I suppose one of the things which is maybe worth asking of the developer is, given that in the update report, you just alluded to it yourself, the restriction for the over 55 is now completely removed and was a key and integral part of the developer's original proposal, whether it was ever going to be able to be implemented or not. And that actually, despite then having to pay, and we'd always have maybe had to pay the contributions towards education, but despite that additional payment, it actually makes it more profitable and more deliverable. So I suppose it is pertinent to ask the question, why would the developer have put that as an integral part of their plan for that in the first place? Because I think that also feeds in, that reasoning also feeds into then some of the consultation responses as well. So I'd like to ask the developer what the reasoning was for that restriction in the first place.
Mr. Jones.
Convener, thank you. Quite simply, we did not know the impact of this development on the education estate. It's only fairly recently, for example, the last report, which was tabled the latter stages of last year, that we found that there was existing capacity in the local school, and the only contribution required from an education perspective was for the secondary school at Larbert, which is more than manageable in terms of what the development has to pay for. But that fundamentally was the central point of which our development proposals were initially framed.
Yeah, and if I may, Convener, I think that point probably is pretty well understood by the community, and particularly by the Community Council. And I think both in their responses to this application for the increased amount of houses, but also in the previous one for the smaller, they commented specifically on that concern that this application in any form should not negatively impact on local schools, and that therefore in that response, that is why the restriction was proposed in the first place. And I think not just the Community Council as a statutory consultee, but a lot of other local and other people who have come back will have commented on the proposal on that basis. So I suppose, but given the Community Council, I know there was a significant engagement between the developer and the Community Council on that. Have the Community Council been appraised of that complete change to the application, which may indeed have then therefore in the community to be able to re-comment on that and give their views in light of that?
Mr. Jones, have you contacted the Community Council since then, or maybe in relation to dropping that condition?
No, Convener. We're appraised in terms of the report that was prepared that there's sufficient capacity for the foreseeable future in the local school. So any impact that this development may have in relation to the school estate clearly doesn't apply. We know from the report that the only contribution required was to the Larbert High School, And on that basis, I didn't think it was necessary. It certainly doesn't change the position of the community council in this respect, because the educational consultations actually confirm that there is capacity overall, subject to Harvard High School having a contribution.
Okay,
Thank you. I'll come back on the points and when we come to, if you come back to me during the debate, but I would say that I'm not attempting to put words in the community council's mouth, but I would say that neither should anybody else, because I think that, you know, that would be for them to judge on their basis as to actually gone to tea.
okay, thanks for that at the moment. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, convener. Thank you. A few questions from you, Mr. Jones. The first one, just a general one, just to get things in perspective. How far is the visitor centre from the actual Pineapple in terms of distance? You know, I live locally. In fact, I'm quite unique. I'm the one member of the committee that's only 400 yards from where the prospective development would finish. So I'm familiar with it, but do you happen to know how far away it is from there?
Yes, in terms of walking distance, we're looking at something like 700 metres.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. My second question, I know Mr. Vivian did mention some. How many jobs would the visitor centre create? Have you updated any figures based on, you know, your latest proposal?
Yes, based on the fully working and operational visitor CAF and the centre itself, we're looking at 20 full and part-time jobs. That's our estimate.
Right. Okay. That's nothing to do with the building. That's purely for the visitor centre, isn't it? You know.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Construction jobs for the project overall, we're looking at somewhere in the region of 35.
Right. No. Thank you very much. In terms of it mentions exhibition space. To get my mind round it, is there any proposal from your client to have any history or historical aspect of that visitor space? Because obviously you know that Airth Parish is very rich in terms of history of the actual area. I just wondered, you know, for visitors, is there any proposal to have, you know, a fixed or you know, a temporary exhibition on the history of the area, which would enhance the value of the centre?
Yes, indeed. We've already been given access to the National Trust's photographic library, which will provide us with documentation, and we intend to put proposals forward that will provide, if you like, historical context, not just for the Airth Pineapple, but for the village and other places of interest in and across Falkirk itself.
Well, that's good. Thank you. And do you have any estimate? I know it's very difficult to calculate how much extra money would come into the area as a result of the visitor centre, but in general terms, do you have any rough estimate how much, you know, that would bring? It clearly would bring jobs, but obviously money coming into the area would be good for local businesses.
Well, we anticipate there will be an uplift of visitor interest. Not solely people looking at or wishing to see the pineapple itself, but I've mentioned the success of Canada Wood in relation to dog walkers, cyclists, and just casual visitors. We see the Airth Visitor Centre providing a central location where it would appeal to a much wider audience. And on that basis, we think that we believe that local suppliers for provisions for the cafe itself would clearly benefit. We think it's a good proposal overall. We're happy that on the basis of existing operations elsewhere, which I quoted in my opening remarks, that the cafe is sustainable long term, and that will provide the focus for bringing more people and an uplift in terms of economic activity generally for the village.
That's good. No, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Jones, and thank you, convener. That's my questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your input, sir. Now I ask Councillor Steenbank, any questions to Mr. Jones?
Yeah, thank you, convener. It'll be a short one because I think Councillor Flynn's stolen a couple of mine. I'm just looking at 4.18 in the report on page 46, and this is based on the projections of how many people will be visiting the site. So obviously it's quite an ambitious figure as laid out, currently in the range of about 10 times more than current Pineapple visitors. So I'm just going to ask the agent, if the applicant, if they could just give us an idea of the engagement work that has been done, both with agencies within Falkirk, but obviously because of the proximity of the Pineapple to the Stirling Council area as well, it's more accessible, I would say, than anywhere in Falkirk from the sort of northern part of central Scotland. What engagement work has been done on a sort of cross-council and cross-agency basis to potentially bring in ideas? You've obviously expanded on the ideas about Forth Bikes and working with walking communities, but obviously to meet that ambitious target, it will require ambitious action. So I'm just wondering what engagement work has been done so far with various tourist agencies, etc.
Visit Scotland were initially approached way back in 2019, and we've kept those contacts open. The Visit Scotland people see this as an ideal opportunity to plug the gap where there's no visitor centre in the area, and on that basis they put us in touch, and we've had communication with similar operators for this type of operation itself. I've mentioned that the applicants have a family-run business in Sutra, which is a cafe shop, and using their past 10 years experience of bringing visitors to the area, that has provided, if you like, the backbone for the sustainable use and that I've suggested for the centre. On the basis of overall numbers, clearly it will take some time to establish itself, but we already have a network at the Kelpies, at the and Calendar House and elsewhere, and we would like to link this visitor centre into that existing network. We will work with Visit Scotland and other partner organisations to promote the Pineapple to establish a visitor link in order to raise those numbers that we're suggesting in our business plan.
Thank you. That's all, convener.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of questions myself, Mr. Jones, with you. First of all, during your summary, and I couldn't ask you maybe to put your sound up a wee bit, because it's you're very low.
Okay, convener, I'll try and do that. Yeah,
That's a bit better. Fine, thank you. It's just because we have people that's coming in and listening to the meeting this morning, and it's obviously you want everything to be directed to everybody. I've got two questions for you. The first one, when you were talking about the construction side of it, what's the template here in relation to the visitor centre? Where does that formulate in the construction side of it? What part is that going to play? Is it going to be in the first? Did you know say it would be the first phase?
I did, convener. This will be the first phase. If committee are prepared to support this application in principle, we will bring forward the detailed proposals of which I mentioned, and we'll tie our first phase building programme to focus on completion of the visitor centre. If the council were looking for some assurances there, we're quite happy to agree a phased release of the housing to tie in the completion of the visitor centre before occupation of any of the first phase bungalows.
Right, fine. The second part is that during the summary for Mr. Vivian regarding the report, and the relationship between the National Trust for Scotland and yourselves, it came out quite negative. But I remember when we were at the PDH, you said quite clearly, and you've already intimated again that you've already had discussions with individuals for that area. I just want you to sort of just give us an overview in relation to how you feel, because obviously the National Trust for Scotland is going to be an integral part of, and is an integral part of that area at the moment. But the fact is that we're going to, if members were minded to grant, and I'm saying if members were minded to grant, which the assurances were going to be that there's going to be a good relationship with your good selves to enhance the whole setup.
Thank you, convener. You needn't take my word for this. At the last predetermination hearing in September, there was a representative from the National Trust who spoke on behalf of the Trust's position. whilst we accept the policy people at the Trust have an objection in principle and have lodged that, Mr. Stuart Maxwell, who deals with the day-to-day operations for Trust properties, confirmed that there was no major issue in relation to the Trust or the impact of the visitor centre on the Trust property. He also confirmed that the Trust would not conflict with any long-term plans, or the visitor centre would not conflict with any long-term plans of the Trust. Mr. Maxwell has been very helpful. He took part in our environmental and visitor impact study that we prepared, and has offered us any further information that we may need to draw together on the exhibition side from any of the Trust properties. So I believe we have a working relationship with the people who manage the Pineapple itself. And on that basis, we think we can, we're quite prepared to go forward on that basis.
Thank you. I did hear that gentleman speaking at the PDH that night. I just wanted, because everybody that was at that meeting isn't here, and the people that's listening into this in live stream that were maybe unaware, because the fact is that it's simply when the report was given by Mr. Vivian, it looked at quite a negative side coming from the National Trust. So I just wanted you just to give us your perspective on it. Okay, have we any more questions? It's questions only at this time to Mr. Jones. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, convener. And it's expanding slightly on where you were going there. I thought you were going to take all my question away there, convener. And it maybe goes to Brent and to Mr. Jones, because I think this question of what the National Trust have said is becoming relatively important here. One, there is obviously, Brent has stated that there is an objection from the National Trust to this. My recollection of the contribution that the chap for the National Trust gave the last time was that he had seen this type of thing trying to be developed before, and that it didn't work. If I remember correctly, Brent might be able to confirm that. Mr. Jones is again today saying the National Trust supports it, and yet the official paperwork from the National Trust is actually an objection. So I'm really getting quite confused over this. I might be wrong, because it was a wee while ago at PDH, but I'm almost certain. I think, convener, you were kind of going down a similar line. That I'm sure the chap for the National Trust the last time said that these types of developments don't tend to work. I'm almost certain he said that.
I'll go back to Mr. Jones, because once again we've got a councillor here that's interested, and obviously we're all interested in the National Trust for Scotland. And if you just want to reiterate again, Mr. Jones, exactly, have you had any further discussions lately with National Trust or Mr. Maxwell or anybody else in relation to this upcoming application?
Officially, no. We had a conversation following his appearance at the predetermination hearing, where I asked if we could get access to his database and photograph and historical records, and Mr. Maxwell was more than happy to provide that with us. Don't forget, they are a public agency, and it would be incumbent upon the Trust to work with us as an adjoining developer on the basis that if the council were prepared to support this proposal. Their position is they did not object to the first application. We'd had ongoing conversations at that stage. They did object to the current application on the basis that there was a change of personnel in their policy section. I'm not trying to undermine that in any way, shape, and form. All I'm trying to point out to members is that as an adjoining operator or landowner, we have a mutual understanding of how we manage these joint proposals. In the view of Mr. Maxwell, there was no difficulty. He was more than prepared to say that there's nothing in what we are proposing that would impact negatively on the Trust's long-term proposals for the Pineapple. And we feel we've got a working relationship with them on that basis.
Okay, thanks for that. Mr. Jones. Any other questions, Mr.
Convener,
Councillor?
sorry, can I have Mr. Vivian come in on it as well to maybe give his side of it as well?
Yeah, I sort of share your problem there, Councillor Bowles. I mean, the PDH was some time ago now, and I struggle to remember off the top of my head exactly what was said, so I couldn't confirm one way or the other my recollection of whether these types of things work or not. I mean, the focus of my presentation was to record the formal response we've received from the National Trust, which is an objection. We've received nothing further in terms of a formal response to change that stance either before or following the hearing back in October. So that's what, you know, at the moment we would have to record in terms of the position of the trust, and that's that reflects the way I presented this morning.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Vivian.
Thank you. Okay, then, is there any other questions for Mr. Jones at this stage? Councillor Murtagh, yeah.
Sorry, I thought we were going to just go into debate, but I suppose rather than bring it up in the debate, then the National Trust question, and I think Mr. Jones confirmed there had been no official conversations, and I would expect, as he said, as a public body, a professional working relationship with anybody would be, you know, mandatory anyway. But the pineapple, although the grounds are National Trust exception visitors, in terms of the actual pineapple itself, my understanding is it's owned and operated as a holiday let by the Landmark Trust, and I note there on the objectives list. So I suppose it's whether there's been dialogue as well in terms of the operation of the pineapple in its current form, which is as a holiday let with the Landmark Trust in itself, and it's a bit of a complicated relationship, but I think it's important to kind of ask in terms of it's not just the National Trust, and also the dialogue not just with the pineapple, who have a very strict boundary, but whether there's been discussion with those in the adjoining path network, you know, down towards Dunmore House, etc., because that's the gateway to all of that area. So that's also really important in terms of if it increases visitor numbers, there's going to be impact on that landscape and the path network and the biodiversity. So has there been dialogue with the Landmark Trust and with other landowners beyond the boundaries of the National Trust?
Okay, Mr. Jones, you got the gist of that. Has there been any dialogue with any owners or in relation to that area?
Not me personally, but consultants who prepared our environmental and visitor impact study would have taken into account these specific considerations. But I personally have had no contact with anyone other than the trust itself.
Okay, thank you. I think Provost wants a question.
Thanks very much, Convener. Just a quick question. Mr. Jones, did you say there was an inclusion for affordable housing in this application?
Yes, through you, Convener, there's out of the 82 units, 20 of which would form the basis of the affordable housing contribution.
Okay, thank you.
Okay then, and there's no more questions. We're just going to go into debate. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Jones, for your summary and for the question and answer period. Thank you, sir. Right, it's an opportunity now for members. I'll go straight to Councillor Murtagh, who's got a hand up there. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. So obviously we've heard a lot already this morning, and I know it's a really difficult to know where to start because there's such a wide variety of topics and policies within the report. But I have to say that despite this, they're very well summarised in the conclusions and the recommendations and very succinctly put in the update report. So from the outset, therefore, I should really begin by acknowledging the work of officers, particularly on topics that are not often part of the planning application process, such as the Equalities Act considerations, and that's led to the reassessment of the proposed age restrictions from the applicant during the recent continuation period. So I'm very grateful for the clarity that was laid down in the previous report, which obviously we have also, and that you know, in relation to that proposed discrimination, and hopefully that helps to simplify things for committee today. But in terms of where to start for planning terms, as with all planning applications, we must begin our assessment with against the LDP. And as we know from the predetermination hearing and what Brent said this morning, this application has already been judged as significantly contrary to the local development plan. And I think some further context, particularly since we've a fairly newly formed committee, that during that LDP2 process, this site was put forward by this developer to the reporter to consider adding it to LDP2 as a site for a visitor centre and bungalow development, and that the reporter concluded that there was no justification for doing so in very robust terms, which I think are very helpfully printed in full in this report on page 33, including there being no reasonable policy justification to support the development that could outweigh the landscape harm, etc. So the site was therefore not included in the plan even after reconsideration of this site by the reporter, and we adopted that plan in 2020 in accordance with that. And everything else really follows from that, because in order for us to be able to consider granting the application, it would have to be able to meet such a variety of policy tests and demonstrate significant benefit, and that there would be clear material considerations to justify overruling the LDP. And I think the conclusions in the report, which are succinctly listed in the update in which Brent has outlined today, is the main reason why I'll be proposing that we agree the officer's recommendations as set out in the report. As I say, I know that we have all probably now read several iterations of the report, so I don't want to labour the reasons too much, although I'm probably still going to, with apologies in advance to the committee, but I do think it's important to highlight a few things. So, number one, this does not constitute a sustainable development under any of the planning policy measures that would enable us to consider it as a contribution towards any shortfall in housing land supply, and that is very clear in the report. Two, the proposal to restrict occupancy to the over 55s, which has now been removed, but it's been added, and it's clear from the view what's been said this morning from the applicant, but also it's clear from the consultants that this is not a financially sustainable development, and only the factor that the landowner is wishing to develop it and gift the land for free makes it possible to consider for the developer at all. And this would represent an unacceptable risk as a basis to consider an enabling development at any time, in my view. But given the prevailing economic uncertainty, especially in construction, and that the assumptions on cost of materials and labour are now out of date, which is alluded to in the report, I cannot see how we could approve a plan of this nature without significant and unacceptable risk. Thirdly, given that it is now accepted that there would be no occupancy age restriction, the impact this could have on local schools, particularly Ladbroke High, which is already the largest high school in Scotland, would be an unacceptable risk to education provision locally, in my view. I would also note that although there is potential that this development could, on paper, be coped with at Ayres Primary, it's acknowledged in the education capacity statement that there is no further room for physical building expansion at this school. And therefore, if there was backfilling of properties in the larger houses elsewhere in the village as this development progressed, that would put the school at risk of overcrowding also. My understanding would already be that taking it to full capacity risks losing the limited additional space used for activities such as library and music room, and there only being one additional classroom to accommodate any class that needed to be, for example, an additional composite or a two-stream primary 2, as has had to be in the past. I don't think that's a risk I would be prepared to countenance, given the impact on the school this would have and the consequences for local families should the school go over capacity. Four, there are significant concerns raised as to the impact on the rural character of the village of Ayres, the loss of agricultural land, the impact on Four Pass and the spread of the village outside its definable limits and towards the village of Dunmore. I would also note that the view from the Moss Road in the Letham direction, and Letham is a conservation area after all, would also be affected due to the scale and the inability to nestle this development into the landscape, and any planting would take many, many years to lessen that impact also and be completely out of character with the setting. As we've just heard, the National Trust have objected to the application and have cast doubt on the business case and assumptions of the applicant, who have based their projections on visitor numbers several times even that of other top visitor attractions in Falkirk, such as Callander House and Blackness Castle. And I find the assumptions about the cover numbers and the limited additional visitors to Pineapple both confusing and contradictory. Six, there are further objections relating to the detrimental impact on historic design landscape and the experience of visitors to the Pineapple, its tranquil setting and the wider situation within woodland walks, which it has to be noted has a variety of unmanaged and unsuitable to access ruins as well as the impact on the unmanaged path network and the biodiversity and environmental setting around them. Quite simply, there is no agreed management plan for the wider site in all directions, and the objection of the National Trust is significant here, as is that of the Landmark Trust who operate the Pineapple building itself as a holiday let, as I've mentioned. Both our housing service and the Health and Social Care Partnership have not supported either the concept of only bungalows, even with the age restriction removed, and the mix of housing and the layout of the street isn't good planning design, and there are serious questions as to the peripheral nature of the location choice and the local access to amenities within the village, even with the age restriction removed. I really don't want to dwell on this aspect because it's somewhat delicate. I did mention it in the questioning, but I would draw members' attention to the balance of where support and objection comes from in the addresses in the report. And usually that wouldn't be something I would really look at, but with the Community Council saying they cannot express a formal view because they've been unable to consult the community, it's something to at least take note of. Also, that more than half of those who have expressed support for the application did so without any accompanying reasoning, which is given the majority are from out with the local environs, gives me at least a feeling of caution over what they're able to contribute in terms of planning considerations. I also think it's important to note, as I mentioned, that the original proposal sought to limit to over 55s and sell that positive case to the community along with the Community Council, that this would not impact on local schools, whether they've got capacity or not, and that it would contribute to local affordable housing needs. So given that this can no longer be argued to be the case, especially since the detail of the latter is entirely missing from the proposal, despite the 20 units mentioned, I think it's at least a cautionary flag in the wind that those who previously saw some benefit may at least reassess their view in light of this. So had this proposal been more viable in other ways, I would suggest that it should at least be given the further chance to input on this, but it's already very clear in my mind that there's such a list of policies it falls foul of that there would be very little merit in that. I could go on, but to be honest, I do have further concerns regarding surface water flooding, which is not an uncommon occurrence along the A95, and particularly next to the visitor centre field, where the significant development of hard standing in place of agricultural land could contribute to what is already a losing battle at times as the road winds down towards the dip at Dunmore and the culvert there. So finally, overall, it's contrary to so many policies as listed in the report. In addition to the LDP generally, and as we've heard, the National Planning Framework that's coming up doesn't alter that. I would struggle to find a reason, even one reason we could consider granting this today. It's far too big in scale. It could do irreparable damage to landscape, local historical and environmental setting, as well as detriment to local schools, wider social care and pressure on local facilities, and whilst having little to no benefit to local community beyond a highly questionably viable cafe. I hope the committee will agree to accept the OSA recommendations, which again I would formally move. Thanks, Convener.
Councillor Chair.
Thanks, Convener. I'd like to congratulate Councillor Murtagh for her off-the-cuff comments. That takes a lot when you're just listening to people's comments to start with, so well done, Laura. Couple of things, Convener, with visiting the site on 2 occasions for site visits, once with the previous committee and once myself because I couldn't make the second visit. If the Low Quay development hadn't been put in place and hadn't started building, I think we would be looking at a completely different application here. But can I ask Mr. Vivian, and it was mentioned regarding this application not being considered for the local development plan, or maybe, I don't know if Mr. Dryden's here, was the Low Quay site considered in local development plan too?
Right.
Anybody else to show
Okay, Alistair Shaw is on the call. Maybe bring Mr. Shaw in.
Yeah, Alistair.
Yep. Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I can confirm that the that the Lockheed Homes, what is now the Lockheed Homes site, was actually in LDP 1. So it was carried forward from LDP 1 into LDP 2. So it was part of LDP 2, but it had previously been part of LDP 1. So I guess the reporter in considering the particular representations relating to the application site in the last examination, he would have been aware of that site being allocated or being previously allocated and carried forward into, or proposed to be carried forward to LDP2.
That's answered. I was looking for Alistair, thank you. With regards to the recommendation 2, when it speaks about are not considered suitable for intended countryside location. In particular, the proposed development extends to open agricultural land and largely unable to advantage the existing features as a topographic and woodlands to integrate and nestle in the landscape. And I'm sure I didn't need to remind my colleagues on the plan committee. We've just passed a development at Gilson, which I feel was not the exact same, but similar, and that didn't meet it, but we approved it. With regards to, this is probably for Mr. Vivian, regards to the substandard with an existing footpath along the A905 between the village and the proposed visitor centre. And reading on through the report at page 36, where the Falkirk Council's Engineering Design Unit agreed that it might help with the pedestrians with the Lockheed site being up and running now, and that could help pedestrians get to the visitor centre. Have we got somebody for Roads Engineering Design?
Yes, we'll ask Craig Russell to come in. Craig?
Yeah, thanks, convener. At the time we wrote our initial response to this application, the Lockheed Homes site hadn't started, so any pedestrians that would have walked to this site would have to walk along the east side of the A905. The Lockheed Homes site has now started, it's well underway, and that would allow a connection to be made from, a theoretical connection to be made from the site under consideration across an unadopted access track into the Lockheed site. The Lockheed site has a better standard of pedestrian connection into the village of Airth than the current proposal would. Does that answer the question, Councillor?
Yes, Craig, thank you very much. And I don't know if this will be directed to you as well, Craig. With regards to the A905 and the road going in towards the Pineapple, it's at the moment it's not a very good road. Do you think the road design that's been proposed will help people visit the Pineapple?
In the context of road safety or attractiveness as a feature?
Both.
In the context of road safety, the Lockheed Homes development has introduced a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit on the approach to Airth from the north. So that 40-mile-an-hour speed limit is in place now. So when you leave Airth, when you leave the 30-mile-an-hour zone, you enter a 40-mile-an-hour zone, and then you enter a D-restricted zone. So the vehicle speed, or the speed of vehicles entering and leaving Airth, should be lower as a result of that. The introduction of a roundabout should affect vehicle speeds in a positive direction, but this is an application for planning permission in principle. We don't know yet exactly where the roundabout will be. We don't know what size the roundabout will be. So, you know, I'd be a fool to guarantee that vehicle speeds will reduce as a result of the roundabout being put in. As I said before in the predetermination hearing, I think it was, it's my experience as a driver that when you negotiate a roundabout on a previously straight section of road, you slow down. So, you know, my suspicion is that yes, the roundabout will affect vehicle speeds in a positive manner, but I wouldn't guarantee that. As to the attractiveness of the facility, that's not really my remit to comment on that.
Okay, thanks, Craig. With regards to the recommend, I'm just trying to look at either recommendation 7 that as the site is not identified as a strategic business location or a tourism node, and the proposed development is unlikely to support the tourism. Surely, as a council, as a local authority, we're trying to assist as many of our great features that we have in Falkirk. And if this visitor centre goes anyway to enhance tourism in Falkirk, surely that is a positive for our local authority. And I'm sure the portfolio holder for tourism will be quite happy if we get more visitors to Falkirk and hopefully get them to stay. With regards to what Mr. Jones had already stated, it cannot be underestimated how much job creation this development could potentially bring. And if we are a council that's looking forward for new businesses, new homes and sustainable tourism, it's something that we really need to think about before we make these decisions. That's all I've got, Convener. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Steenbank at this present time. Just to clarify where we are, we have a motion moved by Councillor Murtagh to agree the recommendation contained within the report. We haven't got a seconder yet, but we'll come to you, Councillor Steenbank.
Thank you, Convener. I'm not prepared to put up a motion either way at this time. I've just got a few questions because I feel like we've still got some issues to clarify on this one, just for Brent at this point. So it's just on first recommendation 2, which Councillor Kerr did touch on there, but I just want a bit more clarification around the definition of what nestling within the landscape would mean in this context. Obviously, as there is a proposal for screening between the two developments recommended by Scotland's.
You went mute, Councillor Steenbank. We'll try and get you.
I think back.
Oh dear, can you hear me now?
Hey, we can hear you fine.
All right, maybe I'll tell anybody else in my flat to turn off the Wi-Fi their devices. Right, aye. So where I was, just a definition from Brent, I think, on what nestling within the landscape means in this context, and then I can ask a further question after.
Brent?
Yep. The development sites within the countryside, so it's subject to consideration under countryside supplementary guidance. The guidance indicates that development within the countryside should nestle into the landscape, and that points to taking advantage of the existing features. Obviously, if you've got existing mature woodland and so forth, you can sympathetically integrate a development into that setting without having wider landscape or visual impacts. In this case, it's development largely on open, unscreened land, and the mitigation proposal was to screen that over time with new planting. The point is obviously that would take some time to establish, which if you're relying on existing established woodland and so forth, you have an immediate advantage in that you can immediately nestle and integrate a development into the setting.
Thank you for that, Brent. I've just got further question. It's just clarification next on recommendation 8, which suggests in the middle part in particular, it's not considered that good access to the proposed visitor centre by walking and cycling would be provided. I assume that means by the application rather than an inherent lack of access based on the physical features and the proximity to the road. So just a bit of clarification on whether that's exclusively talking about the provisions provided for in the application for the planning permission in principle, or whether it's considered that area couldn't provide good walking and cycling provision. Thank you.
Right.
Right, Councillor, are you referring to one of the recommended reasons?
Yes, sorry, it's recommendation 8 there as well. So it's stating in the middle, I was just referring to part of it. In particular, it's not considered that good access to the proposed visitor centre by walking and cycling would be provided. And then it goes on to talk about the location and in the road and parking infrastructure. Is that sort of an inherent thing that couldn't be provided in that area, or is that simply just something that's lacking from the application?
Well, the main issue there, if you're walking from the existing village to the visitor centre, you would probably take the main road, the A905. Beyond the village, it's of restricted width. The applicant's proposing to widen it just by scraping away material and so forth that's overgrown the path. But fundamentally, you wouldn't achieve the required width that engineering design would be looking for. You wouldn't be able to achieve a 2 metre wide footpath, and in terms of a cycle path, you would ideally be looking for a 3 metre width.
Thank you for that clarification, and that sort of leads directly into my next question. Obviously, there's not disagreement, but the different standards obviously applied by the road safety auditor and the engineering design unit. So on page 35, 4.1, that proposal by the applicant was considered proposal to be acceptable by the road safety auditor, but the engineering and design unit remained concerned at the prospect of pedestrians walking along a road. Can we just get an idea of the length of road of the 905 from what would be the access point to this? And obviously I understand it's a application for planning in principle as opposed to a concrete application, but the length of road between that and what is currently the Earth Village limits, where I believe the speed limit goes down to 30 mile an hour on the road.
Craig, would you come in on that one?
Yeah, convener, I can give an indication of that. As it happens, the 40 mile an hour speed limit was extended for a distance of 300 metres from the village limit, and that takes you up to roughly where I've positioned the roundabout to be based on the submitted drawings, but it's very rough, convener.
Okay, thank you. Any
Sorry, convener, can I come back in on that point just to clarify? Yeah. The footway on the east side of the A905 is not narrow for its full length over that 300 metres.
Thank you.
So just 300 metres, but not narrow the entire way up to the Earth Village. I'm just trying to clarify, knowing the area, how long it would be. No further questions at this point, convener.
Okay, Councillor Bowes, followed by Councillor Flynn. Councillor Bowes. Okay.
Thank you, convener. Firstly, I am going to second Councillor Murtaugh's motion. Can I just also touch on a couple of things as well? My big concern is that we end up with 82 bungalows here in an empty building. The National Trust at the PDH was quite clear that they really concerns over the viability of this. There was nothing really positive that the chap for the National Trust delivered in that day. He was quite concerned that it was being intimated that there was support from the National Trust, when actually the only official thing we've got is actually an objection from the National Trust. The National Trust know how these visitor centres work. They operate them throughout Scotland, and they had questions about it. There's other things within here which I'm not going to go over what Councillor Murtagh has already gone over to saying the same thing, but just bore me, probably, never mind you lot. So with that, I'm actually content to second Councillor Murtagh's motion.
Thank you, Councillor Bowes. Councillor Flynn.
Yep, thank you, convener. A few things I'd like to cover, if with your permission. The first thing I'd like to say, actually, I'm very much a newbie to this planning committee. You know, this is my first proper planning committee. But what I'm not a newbie to is Ayr Parish. I've lived here for 22 years. I'm well familiar with the area and the communities, etc. And I'd just like to touch on a few things. First of all, the previous application was approved, I believe. No, I'm not asking for a question to be answered, but my reading of it was approved for a visitor centre. So that was approved. It was just the number of houses that was changed. So the only fundamental change is the number of houses since then. So I don't understand why there's any sort of concern about the visitor centre. The second thing is that I think it was the week before last, I sat in a training meeting, the ETU, the Employment Training Unit, where we spend a lot of money, Falkirk Council, a very good unit, getting people into employment, you know, looking at helping 1,200 people a year into employment. Now, Ayr isn't awash with employment opportunities. It's far from it, actually, and it's like many of our villages, you know. There are a few big employers like Ayr Castle Hotel, etc. But apart from that, there isn't a huge wealth of that. So anything, in my mind, that provides opportunities for jobs, particularly for our younger people, jobs that can maybe get them on the career ladder for different things, jobs that provide income and help take families out of poverty, it's got to be a positive thing. Absolutely 100% positive, you know. And whether the you know, I do accept that businesses can fail, but I'm sure the applicant in this instance has done a proper business strategy plan for his business, because nobody goes to invest money and saying that the chances of you know, a cafe or whatever failing are huge. You know, it must be weighed up. Tourism. Now, regularly I see people walk past where I live, people that have come to visit Ayr and visit lots of tourist attractions in the area, you know, the Kelpies, etc. And they walk up Castle View and they get to the top. And then they stop and they turn round because two reasons. One, the track that goes through the next part and leads on, you know, is not fit to walk on. And two, they don't know, there's nowhere to go. You know, there's nowhere to go. So this would attract people with a proper route there as well, you know. So that would be a definite benefit. And we must want tourism because it brings people into the area. And as Councillor Kerr says, they will want to stay, whichever hotel or whatever, and it brings income and it helps the whole area. On the subject of education, now I've been closely involved when my son was at primary school and there for seven years on the parent council there, and I do understand the challenges there. But both the primary schools and Larbert High School have coped very, very well with the support, obviously, of our education department and coping with that. Now, these 82 houses are not going to be built overnight. They're going to be phased in over a period of 1, 2, and 3 years. So I don't, in my mind, see a major issue because, as you know, there are people leaving school just now, which affects the numbers of people at the primary school and obviously the high school. The high school is well managed under a rector of John Reid and is coping extremely well. And there's other, and they don't all go to Larbert High School. There's other high schools as well on that one. So I don't see that as an immediate challenge there. Now, it was mentioned Lochie Homes. Now, knowing the area and anybody that's visited the area, there's a concrete road there that leads to the big house just adjacent to Lochie Homes. And this development is just the other side of that path. You know, it's no more or less in the countryside than Lochie Homes is. You know, so I don't understand what the challenge is the effect there of the countryside. Lochie Homes is already there, you know, and this is just bungalows, which are in great demand anyway, on the other side there. So there's no difficulty. On terms of housing, now Lochie Homes initially suggested they were going to build 132 houses. Now I believe the number is about 103. So there's a shortfall there. There was a development at the bottom of Castle View, which is unlikely to go ahead. I don't know, but I doubt very much, about 13, 14 houses there. There is a development, interestingly enough, and I'm not sure if it was touched on previous meetings regarding this application, but at the top of Castle View, there's already a planning application which is live and agreed for 13 large houses. When I say large, £500,000 plus houses to be built on that site. Now that is adjacent to the Lochie Homes site and would be adjacent, if approved, to this development as well. But there is a shortfall, just excluding that site, of about 45 houses, and this would help in somewhat to address that. And I think that's a positive aspect there, because we're struggling to meet these targets, and I think anything that helps there. I think as well that the east side of Airth very much needs, you know, that sort of development, and it would link in with the Pineapple. Now, anybody that's gone to the Pineapple will know that the route from the small country road to the Pineapple is pathetic. You know, you risk either falling in a rut or falling down a drain or whatever, or damaging, if you should drive or cycle, damaging your cycle or your car. So I'm assuming the developer would improve certainly the initial part of that road. It would got to be a benefit. They would improve, I'm sure, the 9124 and improve the road quality, and perhaps encourage the National Trust to improve the other road. And it can only benefit visitors to the Pineapple in that area, and it can only link in as well with people in Dunmore and the wealth of history there, and obviously South Alloa as well. So I see it as a continuation of our historic legacy that we have in Airth Parish there. Airth Community Council supported the first proposal, and they're neutral on this one. You know, so I don't see that as a negative. And then finally, anybody that's lived in the area, and I know Laura has for many years, for 17 plus years, we've been trying to make the main road through Airth safe. We've struggled, and the Community Council and petitions and everything, and it's even been raised in the Scottish Parliament. Now, as it was already mentioned, the 40-mile-an-hour limit that was adjacent to the Lochie Homes is a benefit. An extra roundabout before that will increase that benefit, because the traffic has no alternative to slow down. They don't do anything else. I very rarely see people speed up at roundabouts. They tend to slow down. So that is a positive benefit. So if you add the fact that it's jobs, it's tourism, it's history, which is important, it's safety, and it brings money into the area and tourism. To me, I see it as a positive thing, and I would like to propose an amendment where we propose to accept in principle, as whatever the terminology is, convener, apologies for that. I'd like to propose that we put an amendment in to support this application. Thank you, convener.
Thank you. Could I say this, Councillor Flynn, that I thought for your first meeting on the planning, you spoke very well, irrespective of your views.
Would be okay to make it?
Yes, indeed.
Noting that I think that's an amendment been proposed. Clearly, reasons would be needed for that amendment. We have an officer recommendation that's linked to a view that it's significantly contrary to the development plan. So we would clearly need sufficient, concise and appropriate reasons for an amendment. I would also maybe seek some guidance perhaps from Alistair Shaw. If we do have an amendment, I'm conscious that as of Monday of this week, we got notification that National Planning Framework 4 is a significant material consideration that requires to be taken into account in determining applications. And I think it would be remiss of us as a committee not to have regard to if there's anything in NPF 4 that needs to be considered in the context of an amendment proposal to presumably be amended to grant permission in this case. So I don't know, Alistair, if there's anything, if you're happy to give any comments at this stage in relation to NPF 4.
Yeah, I mean, the situation is obviously complex now with NPF 4 now in this short interim period being a significant material consideration. In looking at the policies and the NPF policies in relation to the application, I think they kind of tend to mirror the LDP policies. So I would say they're saying similar things basically to LDP. So there's obviously a presumption in favour of new housing sites that are in the LDP, presumption against those that are out with that aren't within the accounted for in the spatial strategy of the LDP. So I don't know if that helps, Ian. I think the policies basically are similar to the LDP policies and probably have a similar effect.
I think from my perspective that is helpful, Alistair. I think the concern broadly is that there may be a change flowing through National Planning Framework 4 that would impact on actually what our LDP would allow for at the moment or provide for at the moment.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alistair. I thought you may have frozen there for a moment, but thanks for your comments. And I suppose it's maybe just also worth rehearsing the scenario where Section 25 of the 1997 Act does have a presumption in favour of following the development plan. That said, it isn't completely mechanical, and I think coming back to Councillor Flynn in the context of an amendment, it's important to note that you would require to identify material considerations and then consider whether they would be of sufficient weight to outweigh the application of the development plan in that particular circumstance. And in the context of a predetermination hearing application, I would suggest that probably it would be quite significant weight you would want to give to the various material considerations that you would be considering. So happy, convener, to open things back up for further discussion.
No, that's fine. Well, I was actually listening very intently to Councillor Flynn. Obviously, one of the other local members, Councillor Murtagh, spoke initially, and as we all know, Councillor Murtagh is a full professional in the planning. But I was listening intently to Councillor Flynn in relation to material considerations that you were asking about when he was speaking about the improvement to the infrastructure, the economic benefits that they had in terms of job creation, employment. And the fact is that obviously the history of the area as well. I mean, it was Councillor Flynn, I'm not putting any words into your mouth. It's just that I was just jotting these down as I was jotting down for everybody that speaks. And because this is Councillor Flynn's first meeting, but the fact is he spoke very well, but in terms of what you're asking him, he maybe find that a wee bit more difficult. So at the end of it, Councillor Flynn, you could maybe just reiterate for a minute to Mr Henderson exactly the reasons that you think this application should be granted for the benefit of the community, and then Mr Henderson will take a note. I've already stated that the existing improvements to the infrastructure the economic benefits in terms of job creation, the issue about the history of the area, and what you carry on for what you were saying. So we just maybe want to reiterate, it's just that we require this because of the factors that you're moving against the recommendations contained within the report. So you need to have strong material considerations to outweigh that.
Yeah, thank you, convener. Yeah, as you say, it's my first meeting, so it is a wee bit of a challenge of this aspect, but you've touched on exactly what I would have said. I mean, key factors quite simply are the jobs, and particularly for our young people, it's given them an opportunity in an area where there aren't a lot of jobs currently. Tourism. As a council, we very much want to promote tourism. We want to encourage people to not just visit the main tourist sites like the Kelpies, but come along, through this area. And there's a wealth of historical and cultural interest in Airth Parish, ranged from South Alloa, Dunmore, Airth, Letham, that whole area, which needs to be captured, and an exhibition centre would almost certainly work to do that. And I think it's an area that's been neglected. We attract people into the area, but then we don't look after them after that. We get people visiting Airth Castle Hotel, but when they want to go and see things, they can travel the Pineapple, but it's quite a challenging journey just now, So, and in terms of safety and improvement for the area, I can't remember the exact number, but there's about 1,600 people live in Airth at the moment, and we need to improve the infrastructure there, and that is a key factor as far as I'm concerned, and this would almost certainly do that. I don't know the finer details of the proposal, but I can see just from the general details that there would almost certainly be an improvement at that area on the east side of the village, where currently, if you go along the B9124, it really is a horrible junction and not a very nice road anyway. And the road that goes off to the Pineapple is dreadful, is a good thing. So it would improve the infrastructure. I think Mr. Russell mentioned the footpath on the right hand side is quite often overgrown, so I'm sure footpaths and pavements, or whatever you want to call it, and cycleways on this side, i.e. the other side of the road, would make a vast difference, and it would improve the health and well-being of people in the area, people that want to travel through, because there is a recognised, how can I put it, footpath or roads network that comes through, from the other side of Falkirk. So that would actually enhance that. And surely that's what we as a council are all about. We're all about, getting people out, 20-minute neighbourhoods, improving businesses, improving employment. So I don't know if that adds up to what is required, but to me it's quite a composite package that I've mentioned, and why wouldn't this visitor centre plus obviously the properties involved not do that? Plus it would help meet the housing shortfall. I hope that's okay, convener. Apologies if I've not got it right.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. We'll go to Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, convener. Just coming in again, I note that a number of the benefits of the proposal you've noted relate to the visitor centre. You mentioned meeting part of the shortfall in the council's housing land supply, and I'll maybe touch on that in a moment. I think perhaps an area that I would suggest that the committee and Councillor Flynn might want to work through is that clearly in this case there's the housing of 82 houses, which would be essentially an enabling development for the visitor centre, but I think it might be worth thinking through further and the reasons why the housing is considered appropriate in its location and at the scale that it is. And touching again on the housing land supply, and again, I might pass over to colleagues that will be much more aware of provisions than I am, but there is a presumption in favour of development that contributes to sustainable development. That's a material consideration where there is an identified shortfall in the housing land supply. So that being the case, I think it might be worth maybe passing over to Alistair Shaw again, just to chat through the thought process around that, and in particular the thought process around contribution to sustainable development in these scenarios. Alistair, sorry for putting you on the spot there.
That's okay. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously there's a judgment to be made. You know, so what the Scottish planning policy says is that you know, the shortfall will be where there's a shortfall, there's a presumption in favour of sustainable development that contributes to sustainable development. There's a range of factors which I think Brent has addressed in his report, which constitute sustainable development, and it's really just a balancing of those factors. And I guess in terms of the amendment that Councillor Flynn has put forward, he's talking about you know, that the balance, if you like, of those factors, you know, weighs in favour of you know, granting the application and addressing that shortfall. If that's any help.
Thank you, Alistair. So maybe throwing things back to the committee through you.
Yeah, okay, fine. Thank you very much. Councillor Flynn, thank you for that. So I'll just clarify where we are before we bring other members in. We have a motion moved and seconded to agree the recommendations contained within the report. We now have an amendment from Councillor Flynn to grant the application, given a number of reasons, to weigh the material considerations. We got a seconder for Councillor Flynn at this stage.
Just yeah, the point of raising, I think it would be for the committee to consider whether or not, or certainly for Councillor Flynn to consider whether or not the housing element is an acceptable element.
Okay, we'll bring you back in. Mr Henderson's got a query here in relation to the housing element, Councillor Flynn, so you're going to get put in the spot again.
Apologies, Councillor Flynn, but it was just the point I was mentioning a moment ago that I think the committee would want to have regard to, in terms of any motion or amendment in an amendment, if it was proposing to grant, and be quite explicit over whether it's satisfied with the scale and layout, etc., of the actual housing element, as well as the visitor centre. And the point I was raising around housing land supply and what Alistair was touching on there is you can have a material consideration which allows additional housing which isn't provided for in a development plan, where there's a shortfall in housing, but that's where it is considered, the development's considered to constitute sustainable development. Yep. I think, Brent, you'd covered certain elements of that in your report, so I think it's probably worthwhile Councillor Flynn just thinking through those elements as well.
Yep. Would you like me to comment or just have a
I pass over to Brent very quickly on the parts of the report where he actually comments on sustainable development. As I recall, it's probably around paragraph 7 or so.
Yep, sorry, Ian, I'm just referring to my reports. Which paragraph did you refer to? Section?
See, I thought it was perhaps 7B3 onwards.
Yep. Well, paragraph 7B.3 of the main report sets out the various considerations to look at in terms of coming to a view on whether the development's sustainable or not. I mean, the conclusions, or the last section of my main report sets out the various considerations in terms of sustainability, in terms of which can be seen as benefits and those that can be seen as costs. And then really, as Alistair said beforehand, it's a matter of judgment. The balance, in my assessment, is that the costs or disadvantages of the proposed development outweigh the benefits. If we're referring specifically to the proposed housing, I have highlighted a number of concerns in relation to that. The housing would be served entirely off a single long cul-de-sac, which is not supported by designing streets. It would be a fairly uniform development, which is perhaps more of a concern than previously because the scale has increased from 22 to 82. So when I say uniform, I mean in terms of the mix of house types and the density of housing. And the other critical point, which is compounded by the increased scale of the housing, is the encroachment into open farmland and the inability to effectively nestle or screen that development from day one into the landscape, and the requirement for the new planting, which would take a considerable amount of time to mature and provide effective screening. I think the other point is the concrete road that was referred to. That provides a logical, defensible boundary to the village. Lockey home site is on the village side of that concrete path and is an allocated housing site, in contrast to the proposal. At the moment, the concrete path is on the edge of the village, so it provides a countryside experience with expansive views to the west. So by building on that side of the path as well, you're fundamentally changing the character and amenity of that setting from a rural one to a residential one.
And Mr. Henderson, I think that you should simplify and explain to Councillor Flynn exactly what you still require. Councillor Flynn's put forward an amendment. He's given you a number of material considerations he believes outweighs the local development plan. The fact of the matter is, what do you still require for Councillor Flynn, just to simplify it?
Thank you. And I suppose in simple terms, clarification of whether or not you consider that the housing element and the visitor centre are acceptable developments in essentially visual amenity terms, and they're acceptable and don't have an unacceptable impact on surrounding areas. And also with regard to your comment and suggestion that it would help to fill a shortfall in the housing land supply, is that point around sustainable development. And I think what Brent has explained there, and in summary, I suppose it's looking at paragraph 9.5 and 9.6 of the report on page 101 of the agenda, where the benefits and disadvantages have been set out. Now, the officer view is that the disadvantages outweigh the benefits. I suspect what you would be saying would be that you consider that the benefits outweigh the disadvantages, and that it would, on balance, constitute sustainable development. But it's around that, these 2 points, I think some further clarification would be helpful. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you.
And apologies, Convener, for drawing it out. I'm conscious
No, you're not drawing it out, but the fact of the matter is, I think it's simplifying it, especially to Councillor Flynn, who's just a new member of the committee. And I thought he spoke very well in relation to his submission before he put forward his amendment. And the fact is, material considerations, it's a balancing act here. And what we're trying to do is to make sure that you've got enough information coming forward for your amendment to ensure that the material considerations outweigh the local development plan. It's as simple as that, but it's no. Okay, Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, if I could just say a couple of things. First of all, yeah, there is a recognised shortfall in the 5-year land supply situation in Falkirk Council. What the amount is questionable based on a couple of meetings that I've had recently, but there is a shortfall. There is a shortfall on what was originally proposed for the Lochie Homes site, because originally it was quoted as 132 houses. It's now approximately 103, so there's a 29 house shortfall immediately. Bearing in mind the original application was for 22 houses, I believe, and the new one is for 82, so that's a difference of 60 houses. So already, you know, we've almost covered half of that by the deficit on the Lochie Homes one there. Mr. Vivian mentioned the concrete path. It's not a path, it's actually a road. It was built by the farmer, Mr. Sutherland, who owned the big house at the end of it. It's actually a road. There's already a planning live application in for, I believe, 13 houses at the top of Castleview, which would be this side, in other words, the other side of the same concrete road. So already we've got another development potentially coming in there anyway. And I think as well, I don't see any issue the fact it's either side of, you know, just literally adjacent to the Lochie Homes, that there's going to be any, how can I put it, imbalance. You know what I mean? It's, you know, it's quite a long, as you mentioned, a number of houses over an area. It will be intersected, I believe, I don't know what impact it would be, by the road that comes up from the cemetery anyway, so it's not as if it's one continual strand there. And I believe as well there was a proposed site for some houses at the foot of Castleview, which doesn't look like it's going to go ahead, which may well have been included in the numbers. So overall, I think we're pretty close to a sustainable development here, which will actually help meet the shortfall as far as houses are involved. I hope that kind of answers or covers, gets that balance that I'm trying to cover, Convener.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Convener. With your leave, I've been scribbling away and just trying to the points here. So then, and turning it into obviously something that we might consider that would sit well in, say, a minute of the meeting. First of all, I think we would have to recognise that regard's been had to National Planning Framework 4 in the considerations. I think that's an important point to be noted in terms of an amendment, and there'll be some further points I would clarify with planning officers. I think what you would be saying, given that it's considered to be significantly contrary to the development plan, and as the convener was noting, the material considerations, the following material considerations are considered to be of such weight, and that's an important point, is that balancing exercise, as to indicate that the development plan should not be afforded priority. The notes that I've taken of these material considerations are that the proposal would enhance tourism and leisure provision. It would bring economic and employment benefits to the area. It would enhance recreational leisure space in the area. It would bring road and transportation improvements, which I think had been noted and was subject to discussion, would include a roundabout. I've noted that the location and scale of the proposed visitor centre is acceptable, and the location and scale of the proposed housing, which would cross-fund development works for the visitor centre, and its associated infrastructure is considered to be acceptable and wouldn't have an unacceptable impact on surrounding areas. And the next point is around the housing land shortfall. So given what you've just said about sustainable development, etc., I think what you were suggesting is, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that you see the benefits outweighing the disadvantages. So noting that there is a shortfall in the council's housing land supply, and it's considered that the development would contribute to sustainable development with benefits outweighing any adverse impact. The development would contribute to meeting the shortfall in the housing land supply. So these are the material considerations that I've noted, and happy to be corrected on any. I think another point that I'd just draw out and maybe seek some input from Mr. Vivian is that this would be a minded to grant decision, and it would be subject to a number of provisions which would be included in most probably a Section 75 planning obligation. It would also be subject to conditions which we would normally note for the purposes of a minute would be as determined as appropriate conditions by the Director of Police Services. I think it's worth pulling out Section 75 planning obligation conditions, and the ones that I've noted are an open space contribution, provision of 25% units at the site as affordable housing, public transport. I think there was a suggestion that in the report that a bus service contribution would be required for a Sunday service, I think, Brent, a sum of roughly £1,332 per unit. There would be a contribution towards education provision to mitigate impacts and capacity, and I think that was primarily related to Larbert High School, and these can be developed further by officers in due course, but it's good to note them. Phasing of development to ensure completion of the visitor centre, appropriate investment of the proceeds of the disposal of houses into the visitor centre and infrastructure, a safeguarding of floor area for the tourist information display area within the visitor centre, and retention of land for passive open space landscaping. That's what I'd noted from the report. Brent, I don't know if there was anything else from your point of view. I think, is there any contribution from NHS or perhaps anything specific that needs mentioned about the roundabout, or can that be conditioned, etc.?
There's no healthcare contribution given the advice from NHS Forth Valley. I think my initial thoughts would be provision of the roundabout could be covered by a planning condition. I think the Section 75 focus would be on contributions and affordable housing provision and securing the use of the funds from the proceeds of the house sales.
Thanks, Brent. So with that said, that was my summary, Councillor Flynn. I'm happy to be corrected on any of these points.
No, Ian, you've summarised it very well indeed. So, yep, I accept everything you've said there. It's a good summary. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn.
Okay, thanks to Mr. Henderson and Councillor Flynn and the members for taking time there to ensure that the amendment came forward with the proper terminology. But just at this stage, I'd just like to clarify where we are. We have a motion moved and seconded to grant the recommendations, which is to refuse this application. We have now an amendment by Councillor Flynn to grant this application. Have we got a seconder for Councillor Flynn at this stage?
Yeah, I'm happy to second that, convener.
Well, who's come in there? Is it the Provost?
Provost, yes.
Yeah, so you want to say anything on it, or are you just going to?
I'd like to say a few things.
Yeah.
First of all, well done, Councillor Flynn. I think for his first planning meeting, he's been very concise and succinct in trying to break things down. And his summary was excellent, and it kind of accords with what I was thinking. I visited the Pineapple House for many, many years, taking my kids there, and I've always wondered why there wasn't some kind of development there, visitor centre, cafe, etc. And when I saw this application coming along, I thought this could be good for the area, for just what Councillor Flynn has talked about, for tourism, for economy, jobs, infrastructure, all the things that he talked about. And I visited the Lindonning Castle a number of times, and when I first went there, you only had a kind of guardhouse and you paid your ticket to go in. But now they've got a visitor centre and cafe, and the numbers there are phenomenal, coming from all over. So I think it's a significant improvement in bringing all the things to the area that we're looking for. as Councillor Flynn touched on, job creation, employment, tourism, economic growth. Given that we're coming out of COVID, I think we're looking to be improving the area, and I think this development would nestle quite nicely in there, to be honest with you. And so, based on what I've heard from Councillor Flynn and others, I'm quite happy to second Councillor Flynn.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Colley, you've been waiting a wee while, but we've got you now.
Thank you. I actually have a couple of questions for officers, just in terms of conditions if the committee was minded to approve it. And to be honest, some of the things are a bit difficult because it's referring to over 55-year-olds and some of the previous application before the changes were made. One of the issues is around conditions around wheelchair accessible properties and whether that at what point that could be included. But also there's a particular recommendation coming from Housing and the Health and Social Care partnership about actually involving an appropriately qualified person in design, whether that's occupational therapist or others, to make these homes fit for the future as well in relation to adaptability. I actually think that's something that we should be doing across the piece, in making all homes, whether they be council or privately developed homes, that fit for the future, so that people don't actually have to move if they don't need to. So that was one question. The second is, I have to say I'm a bit frustrated by the response from NHS Forth Valley, because the issues around capacity are not just issues around primary care. And I think we'll all be well aware of some of the pressures across the whole health and social care system, but those pressures do not just apply to primary care provision. And I think one of my greatest concerns around this particular application is around a 4.14 around Earth Health Centre, and the fact that that is a satellite provision. For those who move into the area who do not necessarily have access to car transport, for example, this could potentially place much more additional pressure on that practice itself. And the point, they can choose not to take patients on. So we could potentially have, I'll say there's 2 people in every house, about 160 people who we're trying to find health service provision for in terms of primary care. So I know that's probably not something about putting a condition on that, but I do have a specific question about putting conditions around ensuring that appropriate qualified people are involved in discussions around the design process, and around ensuring that there is proper wheelchair accessible provision, because just because something's level access doesn't mean it's wheelchair accessible. So I think it's about at what point would you put information about that? Is that something for officers to add if the committee were minded to grant the application?
Very good point. I'll bring in Mr. Dryden on that specific.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. And I think the points you've raised, Councillor Colley, are very relevant. I could take your point about NHS first. Obviously, you are aware, you've correctly advised of the challenges that we're having in respect of NHS, and that's something we are aware of from the planning process, and there are high-level meetings that are ongoing, and that's something that we're mindful of as we move towards, clearly, the new development plan 3, which we'll now have to embark on. Mr. Shawnee's team will be doing that, obviously through the approval shortly of NPF 4. So yes, that's something that we are aware of and we'll be looking at for the future. Taking the points of wheelchair accessibility, again, a very valid point. Obviously, this is a planning application in principle, So obviously we won't have that detail, but what I would say, there are various areas that can be picked up on. First of all, obviously the building regulations ultimately, you know, should decision be taken today, we need to grant and we get the planning permission issued, and we get into the detail of housing. Certainly, again, in addition to planning permission, there's the building regulations, and there is obviously provision within the building regulations that cover accessibility to ensure that houses are compliant. Also noting, obviously, part of this proposal, there's affordable housing. We have Karen Strang on the call today, convener, so maybe obviously the affordable housing comment, Karen Strang might be able to come in and offer some general guidance from the council's perspective.
Karen, would you like to come in?
Thank you, convener. In relation to affordable housing, in the affordable housing policy, the council's preference is social rented housing on site. My challenge is that I don't know what type of housing is being built. The application talks about bungalows, but social rented housing must meet to qualify for grant from Scottish Government, must meet housing for varying needs. I have seen no information, I've had no engagement with the applicant or the landowner, and so I don't know if the bungalows will meet housing for varying needs and qualify for grant. So I don't know whether they can be social rented housing.
Okay. Very precise, thank you for that. I think it's Councillor Steenbank now. Thanks, Jim. Councillor Steen.
Yeah, thank you, convener. Thanks for letting me back in. I'm wanting to make a short contribution because there wasn't previously an amendment. I think there's a few points just before any decision made that we do need to clarify. And obviously there was the previous report, I believe I'm going to refer to November, which is on page 95 and 96, which is meeting a shortfall in housing need. I think a question that needs to be clarified for myself is that obviously there's a distinction between housing need and housing demand that's been quite important in the analysis that I think led to officer's recommendation on this point. I just want clarity on whether it is standard for applicants to give an assessment when submitting an application of this kind, obviously a unique application, but an application for housing of this standard to assess both housing demand and housing need. I'm not sure who can answer that question, first of all.
Mr. Shaw again, Alistair.
Yes, convener. Yeah, I'm happy to try and clarify that. So the housing figures, the housing land requirement against which the the shortfall is assessed is an all tenure figure. So although there is in the LDP there is a notional split between affordable housing and market housing, we in practice we don't we don't split when we come to assess the shortfall. We don't actually split it in that way. It's the overall shortfall. So that 122 units is all tenure, shall we say. So the way we address the need aspect is really through the affordable housing policy that Karen has referred to. I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah, that does help, Alistair, but I think my key point is that from a developer's perspective, obviously, as this is a private development, obviously with the affordable housing policy to be attached based on any decision, it would essentially be expected that they would have an understanding, potentially a demand as a development business essentially to build houses, but that would be potentially taken into consideration what the housing need is, but it wouldn't necessarily be two separate submissions we would expect from the developer. I'm just looking for some clarity on the point. It's at 8.15 in the report on page 95. It says the applicant submissions appear to focus on the applicant's confidence that there is market demand for bungalows for over 55-year-olds, but there is no assessment of housing need based on the distinction between housing need and housing demand.
I don't know. I mean, it may be that Karen's better placed to address that.
The Falkirk Council's housing need and demand assessment was approved in December last year by the Scottish Government. We have a shortfall of affordable housing, and we have a shortfall of accessible, adapted and wheelchair housing. And as I've said before, we would expect wheelchair or accessible adapted housing to meet certain standards, and mainly the Scottish Government Housing for Varied Needs standards.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that, Karen. And I think this feeds on to the point that obviously a development like this could potentially lead to people moving around, as has been referred to by Councillor Murtaugh and Councillor Colley, and I do agree on the point that potentially looking at the further estate. But back to the application. I also do have a question on potentially developer contributions, and obviously referred to by Councillor Murtaugh. There's an issue with Earth Primary School. I think it meets capacity, but there may be issues that lead to overcrowding there. But also Larbert High School, which has obviously got its own unique pressures, is one of the largest high schools in Scotland. Would this be the appropriate point in which to place developer contributions as a condition, or would that come with the granting of planning permission rather than minding the grant?
And Mr. Dryden will just come in.
Yes, could you confirm the contributions, the mechanism to achieve contributions is through the planning obligation, through the Section 75 agreement, should be part of that minded to grant, subject to the satisfactory conclusion of the obligation of which the contributions covering education will be covered.
Right, thank you very much. And it's just on a final point, I think we've referred to the Community Council representation on this, and it is obviously neutral, but that doesn't mean bereft of content. Actually, I found it a very extensive and very useful contribution from the Community Council. There was a concern raised that this could act potentially as a precedent for further development, and we've referred to the village limits of Earth. Could potentially any planning officer give me an example? For example, if this development was brought to completion, how that could potentially have implications for any future development brought forward in the area.
Mr. Dryden.
Through you, Convener, thank you. No, I think the point of precedent, there's in case law, precedent is really not relevant. It's not material. We have to look at each particular application on its merits. We'll consider those that they come before us on their own individual merits.
Thank you, Mr. Dryden, because I think that's, as I said, a concern that's been raised by the Community Council and people, so it's good to clarify what would be done in those circumstances to potentially allay those fears and know that when we are assessing this might be potentially on this application, and especially referring to the points Councillor Flynn made, I'm not necessarily convinced that it would be an extensive expansion into the countryside, considering the reasons it gave for the geographic place of the development. No further questions, Convener. Thank you.
Okay, we have Councillor Murtaugh has been waiting for a while, but I was going to come back to her at the very end and bring in Councillor Forrest, who hasn't spoken, and Councillor Bowes wants back in. Councillor Forrest.
Actually, I was going to delay that just for a few minutes, if you don't mind, because what I was going to do was actually make a couple of points rather than a question.
No, you can make your points now.
Okay, if you don't mind. I've been listening a lot, and a lot of my questions have been answered. Thank you to you and some of your questions there, and Karen Strang, thanks for your answers. And that but there's a couple of points. Councillor Flynn had said quite rightly that employment was a big thing, but from what we have heard, there's going to be 37 people employed building these over a period of few years, but the visitor centre will attract, or will rather supply 20 full and part-time positions. Now, most of that will be in the cafe, undoubtedly, and most people actually realise that, certainly I know from first-hand experience, myself and family have been involved in the catering trade for a very long time. The catering wages are among the lowest of all groupings within society. The number of full-time jobs that will provide out of the 20 will be minimal, probably 3, 4, and the rest will be part-time. I also thank Councillor Bowes for bringing up something earlier. He mentioned that he wouldn't like to see 80 odd houses and an empty building standing. The cafe visitor centre, to me, with my experience in this, just isn't viable. If we take, for example, garden centres, the most garden centres at the moment who are opening up with catering facilities usually go for between 200 and 300 covers, and they're busy morning till night. The number of covers on this cafe are 176, which will be minimal. It's really quite a small development. And because of that, you've got to remember that during adverse weather, the cafe will be closing or should close earlier. It won't be used to the maximum capacity, therefore it cannot make, in my view, it can't make a viable contribution financially. And this is to help finance the houses. Doesn't make sense to me. So that's one of the points I'd like to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forrest, for your input. We'll go to Councillor Bowes and then we'll finish off with Councillor Murtagh if nobody comes in. Councillor Bowes.
A very quick point, convener. Recently there was a planning application and ultimately it was refused, but it was to do with Larbert High School, but it wasn't primary school. Money's called Section 75, but there was a requirement for nursery in it. There was nursery and high school. Can you make sure that's picked up? Should the committee decide to support this?
Okay, we'll get note of that. Thank you. Okay, if there's nobody else got any questions or any input, we'll go back to Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Nina. As I said in the chat, I have questions which I think are important to debate and might lead to other contributions, I don't know, rather than just summing up. I think, but just on that last point that Councillor Bowes made, and the nursery situation is important, and I think Councillor Colley also picked up on the point about the healthcare provision and how it's mentioned in the report that there's no if practice, which is part of the Lynn practice, don't have to accept any members of new housing, but even of existing housing into their practice, and that leads to a very difficult situation. I'm sure Jim, as Gary is as local members, has many inquiries about the difficulty Ayers Health Centre have, and I have a meeting next month about it, and even coping with the numbers that they currently have, but also inquiries about the nursery. About local families as things stand, even without Lochie Homes, being able to cope with placements, and that's before we get to other issues about there being no additional amenity to the village. So, I mean, I have focused my motion and my remarks purely on planning policy issues, and the first one really, and the key one is, if we are considering this as overturning, if we have to overturn the recommendations in the report and overturn the development plan, we have to find a way of justifying this as sustainable development, which I am slightly flabbergasted that there is an attempt to do, because I can't see how it is possible to argue it is a sustainable development. But I have focused those remarks on my remarks on pure planning policy terms, and not how I would see things as a local resident and a local member. But what I want to ask, and I think what is very clear, because in the update report, and things have changed in the update report in terms of the assessment of the financial viability of the whole site, and it's very, very clear that the only way that this could even be considered by anybody to develop is because the landowner is prepared to give that land for free. So for planning officers, in an example, we have already an example within this, where when you grant planning permission and that planning application is started, so a shovel's put in the ground at the visitor centre, but then there is an issue and the developer cannot continue. That planning permission, as I understand it, like confirmation, cannot be rescinded, and it cannot be altered or whatever. Well, in terms of if it fails, if that developer goes bust, or circumstances just decide to stop as they begin or whatever. That site is left in that way. And I would like officers to confirm that that is the case, because I think this is really important in this case, given the information in the report says this site will not be viable for anybody else other than the person who wishes to develop it. And given the economic circumstances we have, which place that additional risk, if that happens, as has happened in other cases in the village and the situation that happened, we are going to be left with a site that has such a material impact on the landscape. And I would say it's not fair to characterise it that it's just the other side of a path. This is going to fundamentally alter the entire character of the village. It's going to fundamentally rip the heart out of the historic designed landscape, not augment it. And that really needs to be considered in terms of trying to build a case for positive, sustainable development and relying on that being a material positive benefit. They need to understand the implications of what could actually happen in the circumstance where for this developer that goes on. So I'd like officers to clarify what happens in that circumstance.
Yeah, Convener, I can come in. I think Councillor Murtaugh's made a valid point. I can confirm that for case law and planning terms, once a planning permission has been granted, and obviously as long as the works commence, as you say, and obviously this has always been case law about what constitutes a start on site, but certainly, you know, foundations, for example, or drainage trenches, for example, are evidence that have been held in case law where that is deemed to be a start on site. And the point is that if, as long as the works start within the time frame of that planning permission, it's then extant, it's a valid permission for in perpetuity. And therefore, as you said, it is possible. I can advise that there is cases where planning permission has been granted, the works have started, and for various reasons, obviously, that has not been concluded, and it does sometimes lead to sites that could be incomplete for a period of time, and it can lead to issues of blight and concern. That's something we'd have to look at each case. But just to reiterate, yes, the works can start, they don't need to be completed, and then that plan permission, therefore, is then a valid permission, and it can lead to some problems further down the line in terms of amenity and other aspects that we need to look at should that arise.
Thanks, Mr. Dryden.
Can I just come back on that then? So I think from what I understand it, and you know, I also congratulate. I know how difficult it is to come into planning committee, and I'm not getting a Councillor Flint at all, and I absolutely you know, appreciate the position he's in 100%. But in terms of us overturning the material considerations or presenting material considerations to overturn the development plan and legally find a way to grant a planning application of this nature. I think that on one hand, if we are saying, well, we consider that the applicant will have done their homework about viability and whatever, it's clear in the report, and it's clear from the officer's view, not just from the officer's view, but from those who are the professionals in this, from you know, the National Trust of Scotland, etc., that this will not be a viable cafe. And I think what probably also worth the officers clarifying, because I know it's really difficult not to compare with the previous application, but the previous application was a completely different application, and it also included information which is fundamentally different in officer opinion, even though it was also you know, up for recommendation for refusal. It included different circumstances and different assessments, and it also included different consultation things within for the public. But I think it's unavoidable to, if others are bringing in a kind of case that, well, it was granted before, and that should add to the weight of why the visitor centre should, you know, be passable. I think actually the visitor centre element is different in this application than what it was previously. The exhibition space is scaled down, and it is down as being as what's been said by National Trust, a cafe really, and that's how they're viewing it, and therefore they've viewed that the numbers that are provided aren't viable. So if others are trying to make an argument based on material considerations about jobs, etc., given that it's demonstrated quite clearly that it's not a viable business proposition, I'm all for jobs in the local area, but it's the risk that we put in what clearly is demonstrated is not a viable option, that we believe that that's going to outstrip Callender House and the Kelpies and Blackness Castle and all the rest of it. is not, it's not sensible and it's not sustainable. And I think the information in the report is really very clear, and the danger and risk of approving this, given that, I think is really, really significant. And I would plead with members of the committee to really look at that detail within the report, because it will inarguably unalter the character of this village and the historic design landscape, vastly to the detriment, in my own opinion, but very significantly. And it's a huge development. It will be the second largest street in the village by my reckoning, and a huge extension and danger of coalescence with Dunmore. So I think that is the context, and it will absolutely alter that character of approach to the pineapple and the experience that everybody has of the pineapple as a tranquil, valuable nature space that is, after all, a holiday let and not suitable for this sort of development. So again, I think it would be worth officers clarifying the kind of relationship of what the financial, what in the update report about the financial sustainability and their own opinion about what could possibly constitute a sustainable development to overturn the local development plan and considerations that we've got.
Okay, so you're asking a question there?
Well, I'm asking firstly about, it's difficult because of the relationship between the previous, but there's a change. It's been cited by Councillor Flynn in the reasoning that about the previous application, the visitor centre, but to confirm that there is a change, even in the visitor centre layout and what it's proposed, that it is now a cafe, that to confirm that the professional assessment of historic or National Trust for Scotland is that it's not a viable cafe and business model, and really to confirm as well, to comment on the alteration of the character of the historic design landscape and what that actually means in practice. And finally, basically, what would constitute sustainable development to be able to overrule the development plan, because that is what ultimately what we've got to judge.
Okay, we're going to bring Brent in, because I say this to you, you're very professional in what you say at committee meetings, but as I've said before many times, this committee is made up of 12 members. Every member has an opportunity to speak and express their own opinions. We other members have got an opportunity to listen to them, whether we agree with them or not. That's not the point. The fact is that they get the chance. We don't go then on when we've got an opportunity to summarise or ask questions, then attack or criticise anything that they've got to say. The fact of the matter is that we're all professional here. With 12 speakers, I don't think we've got 12 today, and everybody's got an opinion to express. Okay, is there, Brent, would you like to come back to Councillor Murtagh there?
Yeah, I'll come back on a couple of points if I can. I can confirm there are changes in the proposed visitor centre between this application and the previous one. The size of the visitor centre under consideration now is decreased in size, and the principal use of the visitor centre is now a cafe, whereas that wasn't the case previously. The Trust consider that we should consider the visitor centre as primarily principally a cafe and retail use, and assess it on that basis. And I certainly wouldn't disagree with that view. In terms of impact on the design landscape, I could maybe give a bit more detail around that. But fundamentally, it is a significant intervention into the design landscape. The proposal was to realign the B9124. So it would extend through the design landscape. It would divorce the East Lodge from the pineapple itself, which is a significant impact on the landscape. The existing main approach to the pineapple past the East Lodge would be closed off, So you would lose that understanding and appreciation of that aspect of the design landscape. That access is historically the main access, and under the new proposals you would take access to the Pineapple through the new realigned 9124. The mitigation strategy to basically screen the visitor centre to a degree with new planting, I think potentially misunderstands the design landscape, which has heavily planted inner policies surrounded by a more informal layout consisting of open farmland and parkland. So to introduce new planting into an area of the landscape which is characterised by open parkland and farmland is not something that we could support.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, we're okay. We're going to go to the vote now. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been a long drawn out saga this, but I think we're going to come to a conclusion in a minute now. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. We have a motion by Councillor Murtagh, seconded by Councillor Bowes, to refuse the grant of planning permission in principle in accordance with the officer recommendations. And then we have an amendment by Councillor Flynn, seconded by Councillor Dissett, which is amended to grant amendment subject to the conclusion of a Section 75 agreement. And I don't propose to read out exactly what I said earlier. Yeah, I think members hopefully heard that earlier. So I'll run over in terms of a roll call vote. Provost Bissett.
Amendment.
Councillor Bowes.
Motion.
Convener Councillor Buchanan.
Amendment.
Councillor Colley.
Motion.
Councillor Flynn.
Amendment.
Councillor Forrest.
Motion.
Councillor Kelly. Motion. Councillor Kerr.
Amendment.
Councillor Murtagh.
The motion, but I just draw my attention to the legal officers with the comment I made in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Redmond is absent at the moment. Councillor Sinclair.
Councillor Sinclair has also had signal issues. Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry, did you call me there?
I did, yes, thanks.
Yeah, so motion.
Thank you. Councillor Steenbank.
Amendment.
Yeah. I have noted 6 votes for the motion and 5 for the amendment, and the motion is duly carried. Thank you, convener.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious of the time. What time is it, Ian?
It is approaching
half an hour before we. Yeah. Okay, that takes us to item 5.
Convener.
Yeah.
Councillor Murtagh was talking about another amendment. Is it another amendment coming forward?
No, well, now that if the motion's been carried, then there wouldn't be a further amendment. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I couldn't get anyone to interrupt in the middle of the provost speaking before to say that I was putting that notice forward. But my motion has been carried, as I understand it, if that's correct.
So you just wanted to get beat?
No, I was wanting, and I think that's a really inappropriate comment. I was wanting to give a potential notice of further amendment, which I think is always an appropriate thing to do.
I didn't mean to be abrupt or condescending, Councillor Murtagh. If it came across that, I apologise.
Apologies for interrupting Councillor Clare and Councillor Murtagh. Just from my recollection of our standing orders, you're not allowed to raise a further amendment to a motion unless there's been notice of amendment. but an amendment, if it's carried, can be subject to a further amendment without prior notice having been given. I think Mr. Frawley's looking at me askance. We would have sorted that out if the situation had arisen. Thank you, councillors, and thank you, convener.
No, fine, thank you for that. Okay, that takes us to item 5. Construction of 229 Fairland House with associated access, parking, landscape and open space drainage, phase 1 subject to detailed approval. Plan for mission and principle is also sought for further residential development, potential commercial, community use phase 2 and associated access, parking, landscaping, open space and drainage at the land of south of Bowness Fire Station, Crossfield Road, Bowness for Robertson Residential Group Limited, AWG Property Limited, McTaggart Mitchell Homes Limited, partners of and trustees of the firm Robert Powell. That's a continuation and it's pages 116 to 169. Now we also have a deputation request. An application has been made by Colin Lavity, agent for the applicant, to be received as a deputation to be heard in respect of this item of business. We're happy to hear Mr. Lavity.
Happy to hear that. I agree.
That's perfect. Now go straight to Kevin Brown, who will introduce the report. Kevin.
Thank you, convener. Firstly, Jack, could I ask if you could show the master plan drawing for the application, please? Thank you. This application refers to allocated housing site H55 within the Falkirk Local Development Plan 2 and is located on an area of existing farmland to the south of Crossfield Road in Bowness. The proposal before committee seeks detailed planning permission to develop 229 dwelling houses on the eastern half of this site, referred to as phase 1, and seeks planning permission in principle to develop the remaining western half of the site, referred to as phase 2, for residential development. Jack, I was also wondering if you could scroll through the Crossfield Road site photographs that are in the file there as well, please. Thank you. It's just to give committee some context. The site, as I said, is in the sits to the south of Crossfield Road. The area is all farmland at the moment. This is the western portion of the site that you can see in that photograph. This is looking back along Crossfield Road to the east. Further along, this portion of the site is the PPP element. As we'll travel further along Crossfield Road, you get towards the detailed element of the site, where the site levels become more apparent. It slopes in some parts quite heavily from south to north towards Crossfield Road. You can see better in that photograph there. Thanks very much for that, Jack. If you wouldn't mind bringing up the landscape strategy plan now, please. That's great, thank you. The detailed proposals for phase 1 include new vehicular accesses onto Crossfield Road, the provision of a new play area on the southern edge of the site, and a new kickabout area in the northwest corner, as well as formation of drainage ponds for the sustainable urban drainage system along the Crossfield Road frontage. Prior to the drafting of the committee reports before you, we had received a total of 4 letters of objection and 2 letters of support for the application. Members' attention is drawn in particular to one of these representations submitted on behalf of the Friends of Kinneil. This representation makes a case for developer contributions from this site to be spent within the Kinneil estate. Members should also be aware of one further representation received since the drafting of these reports. This representation highlights a flooding event which took place on the Crossfield Road area on the 30th of December 2022. In terms of the consultation process, responses to the consultations are summarised in section 4 of the committee report, which was put forward at the 25th of October 2022 and is attached to the back of the reports today. And within the 2 subsequent update reports, of particular note here are responses from our flooding and drainage team. Members will recall previous continuations of this item to address flooding concerns in the area. These continuations have allowed for additional information to be provided by the applicants in respect of flood risk and in respect of the surface water drainage proposals for the site. Following consideration of these additional submissions, the flooding team are able to confirm that no flooding or drainage concerns remain outstanding. The existing flooding experienced along Caulfield Road and highlighted within the representation recently received does not pose a risk to the proposed development, and the installation of a positive drainage system across the site is considered to result in a general betterment to the area by allowing the capturing of existing overland flow from the land to the south of Caulfield Road. In terms of policy assessment, the application is assessed as being in accordance with the terms of Local Development Plan 2 and associated supplementary guidance. Members will also be aware, as has been discussed today, of the emergence of the National Planning Policy Framework 4, which has recently been approved by Scottish Parliament, but which is not yet formally adopted. The Scottish Government Chief Planner letter issued just recently on the 16th of January expresses that the Scottish Government expect to adopt NPF 4 on the 13th of February, at which point it will become part of the development plan and Scottish planning policy will be superseded. Until the 13th of February, NPF 4 is a material consideration, and it is for members to decide what weight will be given to it in the assessment of applications. It's our assessment that NPF 4 against this application is that the content of the draft NPF 4 does not alter the recommendation before members today. With this in mind, I would conclude that the officer recommendation in this instance is for members to be minded to grant planning permission subject to the satisfactory conclusion of a Section 75 planning obligation and subject to the planning conditions outlined in the report. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Kevin. As we've said, an application made by Mr. Lavity, and you have 10 minutes, sir, to address the committee.
Thank you very much, Convener. I appreciate the opportunity to address the committee today. As you know, my name is Colin Lavetti. I'm the planning consultant working on behalf of the applicants. Joining me today is Martin Eaglesham from Robertson Homes, just in case we need to respond to any questions from members. We very much welcome and support the positive recommendation, and I wanted to take this opportunity on behalf of the applicant to reiterate a few key points in relation to the proposal, to emphasise to elected members how important it is that they support this application as per officer recommendation. As you're aware, the site at Caulfield Road is an allocated housing site. It's a priority for development and it forms a key part of the Council's overall spatial strategy. It's therefore crucial that the application is approved as per recommendation to help the Council deliver its obligations in terms of its housing land supply and provision of an adequate number of new homes to plan for future growth, including much needed on-site affordable housing. Since its allocation was confirmed in 2020, the applicant and the project team have made this site a priority, and we have worked very positively with council officers throughout the pre-application and application process to agree a high-quality approach to the site's layout and design, ensuring that what is presented is in accordance with policy guidance and published standards in relation to transportation, flood risk, drainage, ground conditions, biodiversity, noise and air quality. I think obviously that's reflected in what you just heard from Kevin. As acknowledged in the committee report, we have reached this point through careful consideration of the consultee responses received, and this has resulted in the applicant making a number of positive amendments to the proposal during determination, which includes reducing the number of units from phase 1 from 229 down to 227 units, just a minor change there, improving the open space and play provision and landscape framework within the site, which you saw in the earlier drawing. And defining the street hierarchy and ensuring positive frontage to the open space. So there was quite a lot of time spent since the application was submitted to respond to comments made. What is now presented in detailed phase 1 layout is fully compliant with LDP2, and the phase 2 indicative layout provides, in our opinion, a clear framework to guide the layout and design of future phases, which again can deliver a range of private and affordable housing, ranging from 1 beds to 6 beds across the site. In terms of the acceptability of the proposals in planning terms and environmental terms, I draw members' attention to the fact that I think, as Kevin just reported, only 4 objections with 2 letters of support were received, and there's no objections from any consultees, nor are there any technical matters still to be agreed. We are aware of concerns that were touched on earlier about flooding, and note that drainage and flooding related matters did result in the application being continued from the November committee. By way of explanation, any existing flooding issues are caused by overland flows associated with the field, where currently there's no means of capturing the surface water, and the existing ditch is proposed to be diverted as shown in our submitted drawings. There'll be a positive drainage network capturing this surface water, conveying the same to the proposed suds basins that you see on the layout. So again, just to maybe emphasise, the applicant's drainage strategy report demonstrates that there is adequate connections to the public sewer network and ability to manage surface water runoff. And in terms of flood risk, since the last committee meeting, there's been a full flood risk assessment provided. And this confirms, as noted in the officer's report, that existing flooding along Crawfield Road poses no risk to the proposed development, and the proposal will in fact actually provide betterment to the existing flooding situation. As such, the Council's flooding and drainage consultants have no outstanding concerns or objections, and SEPA also have no objections to the proposal. In our opinion, all of this demonstrates beyond doubt that we have a technically sound drainage and flooding strategy for this site. In terms of public transport, the transport assessment submitted provides an overview of the current accessibility and public transport provision at the site. This confirms there's two pairs of bus stops adjacent to the site in Crawfield Road, a southbound bus stop and a northbound hail and ride area present on the Lithgow Road. And as most of you are probably aware, these bus stops provide regular services between Linlithgow and Bowness, whilst the rail station park and ride is 10 minutes drive of the site. Added to this, I would draw members' attention to paragraph 7A.15 and 4.3 of the committee report, which confirms the case officer's opinion that the site benefits from being located on an existing bus route, and the proposal to provide additional connectivity across the site is welcomed. As such, the proposal does accord with policy LDP IR05. Touching briefly on National Planning Framework 4, which obviously has been mentioned earlier and covered there by Kevin, we're absolutely aware it's currently a material consideration in planning applications and is soon to be formally adopted. We would absolutely agree with what Kevin's just reported. We consider that overall the application is compliant with MPF4 as it stands, specifically the key housing policy, policy 16, which states that development proposals for new homes on land allocated for housing and LDPs will be supported. Before finishing up, I should emphasise the positive benefits to the proposal, which is not just the delivery of a significant amount of new homes on an allocated site. The wider benefits include the provision of traffic calming and new drainage measures along Crawfield Road, as well as significant recreational areas, including formal children's play, kickabout area, new walking cycling routes, a trim trail route and other landscaped areas. In addition, the proposals will result in the delivery of much needed affordable housing and a significant amount of economic benefits, which would broadly equate to 53 direct jobs and 62 indirect jobs, total GVA generated of circa 49 million, circa 9 million retail and leisure expenditure locally, council tax receipts of circa 765,000 per year, and as per the committee report, the recommendation over 1.6 million in planning gain contributions across both phases towards upgrading of nursery education provision, public art, footpaths, green space improvements and healthcare capacity. So thanks for your time. We didn't feel the need to take up the full 10 minutes, hopefully, but we look forward to your support with the approval of this application.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to open it up to members. Obviously, I think we're all aware that this was a call-in to a local member in relation to the concerns of the flood risk. And we've seen that in the report, and you've given us an overview of your company's position on this. But if any member wants to ask a question, Mr. Laverty, at this stage, I'm quite happy to move the recommend. Sorry, Councillor Bowles.
Thank you, Convener. Just a very quick one, Mr. Laverty. The affordable housing, as I think Karen had actually explained earlier on, obviously the preference is socially rented housing. Is that what we're going to have, or is it going to be just houses built and they'll be at a cheaper cost?
Thanks, Councillor. What we are proposing is on-site provision, which is, I think there's an area identified within the phase 1 layout. I'm aware that the applicants or clients have discussed with the council's housing team the potential unit mix to go in there to obviously try and make sure that what's delivered is what's required locally. And obviously we heard one of your colleagues talking earlier about the shortfall of affordable housing across the council area. So the final detail would still probably come through following approval. certainly for phase 2, which obviously is subject to planning in principle at the moment. But the phase 1 detail layout, yeah, we've got detailed house types, and that's proposed to be delivered on site alongside the other private housing on phase 1.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Steinbank.
Thank you. No worries. Thank you, convener. It's more of a question for planning officers, but obviously, if this isn't the appropriate juncture, happy for other members to come in.
I think you're fine at this juncture.
But thank you, convener. Just a question on developer contributions. Obviously, we've got a report, I believe, that previously came before us in October, and then we've got the recommendations update for January. And obviously, on the previous item, it was referred to by several members, inflationary pressures that obviously exist that were quite rightly mentioned. I just note that the recommendation for the volume per dwelling house of developer contributions is the same as it was previously recommended in October. Obviously, as a relatively new member of the committee, it would perhaps just be worthwhile clarifying potentially how that was reassessed with the new recommendation coming forward, or if it was reassessed, especially in the context of the school estate potentially being greater utilised by the community, with further decisions to come from various parts of the council. Thank you.
A good point. Mr. Dryden.
Yeah, thank you. Just very general. I think you raise a valid point given the financial climate that we're currently encountering. As it stands just now, the contribution is in line with our current guidance and policy. What I would say, obviously, with the nature of these types of agreements, they do take time, but normally what happens can reassure you that they're index linked as well. So clearly this will take a lot of time to develop. So certainly as a standard part of any planning obligation, that any contributions, where they're quoted, they are index linked and obviously will reflect inflation and other pressure.
Okay. Okay, Councillor Steinbank.
Thank you.
A good point. Okay, then, if there's no other questions, I'm happy to move the recommendation contained within the report. Does everybody agree? Anybody otherwise minded?
I'm just going to, sorry, convener, I was just going to say I'd second that.
Okay, thank you. Anybody otherwise minded? Councillor Murtagh, you have your hand up.
I'm not otherwise minded, just but I did have in the report and in the conditions, and I'm just trying to go back and find it. It was mentioned about one of the conditions being about the sort of energy generation and sustainable production. I'm just trying to actually find it because I scrolled through when the agent was speaking to the part that he had looked at, but essentially, given that NPF4 has come in, and I have read NPF4, but in scant detail, in terms of the kind of, as I understand, there's obviously intention to augment the provision around the sort of sustainable and ecological requirements for new housing, etc. Can we? I know that they're fairly broad for the development of development or place services, sorry, to kind of define. But can we kind of put a note in there somewhere, or is it possible it's already within it to sort of say to kind of emerging standards or that kind of thing, just to make sure that we get the maximum benefit? I'm sure it's the intention of the developer to do them to the best standards possible, but just to be sure that we're kind of reflecting the most up-to-date planning policy. I just wonder whether officers could maybe comment on that, just so we get the best green options there for housing.
Good point, Mr. Dryden.
Yes, convener, thank you. Councillor Murtagh raises a valid point. Clearly, the NPF4 is the strategic, will become the strategic element of your development plan in the next few weeks. So clearly, it sets a strategic overview, it emphasises net zero transition. We already have policies in our local development plan too, as you're well aware, as Mr. Shaw heard earlier on this morning. By and large, the policies that we have in LDP2 closely reflect the principal strategic direction of NPF4. As you will be aware, we will be embarking on LDP3 soon, and therefore we will have the opportunity to enhance that. But just to be reassured that our policies that currently are in the LDP2 are robust. I would also add, as a safeguard, the building regulations, when obviously building warrants have to apply for as well. They also have highly stringent policies. So be rest assured that the policies we have in place are the currently most up to date to reflect the need to move to net zero.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, just to reiterate, I've moved and we've had a seconder for the promise to agree the recommendation contained within the report. Does everybody agree?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much for that. That takes us to the last item on your agenda, It's item 6, construction of outbuilding and ancillary living accommodation at the Woodyard, Coach Holdings, Blacknet and Lithgow for Mr. Steve Matthews. It's pages 170 to 177 and they're reported by our officer Julie Seidel Gregory. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Convener. This application relates to the development of an outbuilding to be used as ancillary living and garage accommodation at the Woodyard in Blackness. The main dwelling house is currently under construction and at the time of the site inspection was at a very advanced stage. No issues were raised by consultation. We did receive one neutral representation which was inquiring in relation to the number of outbuildings which would be developed at the site. A direct response was provided to the inquirer and no further comment was made. The site history is discussed in section 3 of your report. Members should note that this proposal is on the same footprint and seeks to replicate the original scale, massing and character of the outbuilding approved as part of planning application P18-0175 full, whilst achieving the required level of accommodation and a suitable design. Planning permission for an outbuilding at the site of a very similar size to this current proposal is extant and can be implemented. The application is assessed as being in accordance with the development plan. This is with specific reference to policy HC08, residential extensions and alterations, and also supplementary guidance SG03. As referred to in relation to other applications on this agenda, the Scottish Government Chief Planner issued a letter on the 16th of January confirming that on the 11th of January the Scottish Parliament voted to approve MPF4. Members should note that it is not yet formally adopted and it will be adopted and published on the 13th of February, at which point it will become part of our development plan and Scottish planning policy will be superseded. Until that time, MPF4 remains a material planning consideration and it's for members to decide what weight should be given to it in the assessment of the application before committee today. In this particular case, it's considered that the enhanced status of MPF4 does not alter the recommendation before you today. The application is recommended for approval subject to the conclusions at section 9 of your report. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Julie. I'm quite happy at this stage to move approval of the recommendations contained within the report. Seconded. Seconded here. Is there questions from Councillor Colley?
No, not a question. I was just happy to second that as well, but you already
Oh,
have one.
that's good. Okay, it's moved and seconded. Is there anybody otherwise minded? Okay, it's agreed. Okay, and thank you very much everybody for your continued support for this wonderful committee. Thank you. Thank
Thank you, Convener.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Convener.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eve. The thing is, it made me do it.